100 years ago, a rift cut through the sky, creating dungeons. Monsters began to appear from the portals. Mighty dragons, hordes of demons and orcs, and other magical creatures that could not be defeated by mere weapons came relentlessly. The only ones who could resist them were people who had awakened their supernatural powers at that moment. With considerable effort, the awakened still managed to establish a balance in this new world. Due to the emergence of monsters and mana, civilization began to change, and the awakened became monster hunters. But after decades, there were too many hunters, because the mechanism of awakening was discovered, and it was possible to do it artificially. Now any weakling with money could become an awakened one, buying himself a ton of confidence. A respectable craft turned into a circus for money children, and so the whole era of hunters began. Whole crowds of people, no longer waiting for the monsters to come out, stood in lines to the portals themselves, crushing each other to death. After a number of attempts by the government to somehow solve the problem of an excessive number of applicants, an exam for the title of hunter was introduced. Only after passing it could one become an active hunter. At the same time, educational institutions for physical and informational training of the awakened began to appear. Over time, they grew into entire academies and provided everything necessary for such a craft. When he met a graduate of the academy, even the mighty dragon could not believe the human strength. The boy cut off his hand, inflicting many other severe wounds, and did not even gasp for breath, accusing him of narrow-mindedness. The monster refused to accept this and tried to hit the attacker with its tail, but the latter easily dodged it. The paw also missed, and the boy with the spear chopped down a giant column above the dragon, and it landed directly on the monster's head. The dragon broke through its wreckage and opened its mouth to form a sphere, the stream of which flew in the form of flames at the attacker. The boy recalled the words of all the instructors, about fists that challenge the heavens, about opening a new world by learning mana, about the prohibition to simply die, and about running faster than light itself. He knew that his academy was simply on a different level of existence compared to others. He easily finished off the dragon to his thoughts, and was already deciding to sign up for the next lecture when he took out his phone. The Ascension Academy thanked him for his choice, and the phone announced the beginning of the class. Seo Joon, a 27-year-old man, was a naturally awakened person. Kim had gotten a boost in strength, but now he was carrying dead monsters on a stretcher to pay off his parents' debts. His old people died in a mysterious accident, and he has been loading dead monsters into trucks for 9 years. He had a dream that kept him afloat all this time, despite the hard work and psychological pressure of debt. He wanted to become a professional hunter. In between work, his partners, who were much older than him, sometimes asked him about his business and his success and his plans for the future. Kim told them that it was not easy to find a good academy, and at the same time, an inexpensive one. The older man thought that any awakened person could become a hunter, but his partner, who was in the know, reminded him that without passing the mandatory exams, one cannot become a hunter just like that from the age of 50. Over the years, active hunters began to teach at the academies, sharing their experience and revealing the intricacies of the business before someone had to risk their hide in battle and gain this knowledge with blood. Advertisements for such academies were everywhere, and there were always many applicants. Such institutions formed an unbridgeable gap between their students and ordinary, albeit awakened, people from the street. The times came when studying in such academies became compulsory, and not just for the sake of a mark. So Jun checked his phone balance, and finally he had saved enough money for 1 year at the academy. Although he wanted to find a better school, this money would not be enough. He was happy to have this opportunity. The next moment, his phone rang with an advertisement for a certain Transcendent Academy. This was the first time he had heard of it, so he decided to watch the ad, which pompously presented its best teachers and promised individualized lessons for each student. Excerpts of an interview with a 9th-level swordsman whose life was changed by an academy he hadn't expected, and the words of gratitude from a happy old sage to the same academy just tore him apart. He could not believe that someone could make such a stupid commercial. The website of this academy was the same as the others, but the names of the teachers were surprising, including Hercules and Merlin. Kim was curious to see people with such names and opened a video of one of the lectures. The monkey man, who called himself the Great Sage, presented his staff and said that it was not much different from an ordinary stick or spear. The lesson seemed normal, looking at the general concept. The man proposed to move from theory to practice by showing a technique. He skillfully demonstrated defensive actions, and the next moment showed a stance of attack. The tip of his staff was enveloped in electric charges, and his eyes shone. The teacher ordered to pierce the enemy with a single movement in the right place, and struck the rock. He shouted the spell pierce, and the next moment a huge hole appeared in the rock. Kim could not believe his eyes, and jumped up in surprise. He had never seen anything like this before, and the video did not look like a fake. Such power was impossible even for S-class hunters. The video ended, and an advertisement offered to sign up for the class. The boy immediately clicked on the recording, but received an error because he was not a member of the academy. The app offered to register an account and pay a membership fee. The registration fee would be calculated individually based on his situation. The guy didn't understand what kind of individual situation they were talking about. Even creating a simple account required money. The system calculated the payment and displayed the amount on the screen, warning about the possibility of fluctuations in the amount of payment for further lessons. Kim peered at the amount and counted the zeros in it. These charlatans were asking for all his money at the time. His partner loaded small monsters on the boy's back and asked if he was finally going to the academy, because he had also heard the advertisements. Now it was clear why Kim was in such a good mood. So the man wanted to know the name of the academy. The boy was going to the Ark because he had heard that the teachers there were good. His partner asked him not to forget him when he finally got there. The crane was unloading a giant minotaur, and his partner was laughing and dreaming that he would finally get a dragon after the boy. Kim promised that he would even be able to play soccer with the monster's skull, and headed for the car with the cargo in his backpack. Life could seem like a comedy if you looked too far away. But the next moment, one of the crane's chains snapped and the minotaur flew right at the boy, who only had time to call out. But life is really a tragedy when you look at it closely. When he woke up in the hospital, he listened to the doctor's report, which told him that the nerves in his legs had been necrotic. To really laugh genuinely in life, you must first accept all your pain. Because he had been awakened, his bones were wrapped around his nerves in an accelerated healing process, and an expensive operation was needed, which had to be done soon. The employer didn't want to hear anything about compensation, and was more concerned about the company's reputation. So he hushed up the case by handing the boy an envelope. The operation was to cost the entire amount that the boy had managed to save. Life demanded that he look far ahead, and that's what he did, working for 9 years at this hard job. All his savings were spent on the operation, and he had only those miserable 3,000 from the envelope. Kim was wondering if he could go through all this again, and at some point his phone rang. He received a message from the very same academy with a lame advertisement and an exorbitant membership fee. But the content of the message was surprising. It said that although the past of all students is always insignificant, there is now a special offer with a free pass. From that day on, Kim could not find this academy again, and then it appeared. The program transferred the down payment and demanded 3,000, taking into account the special situation. The guy was surprised by the new amount, because he was sure that last time they demanded as much as 40,000. He thought that that time it was all his money, and it seemed as if they were just trying to scam him out of everything he had. Kim decided to give it a try because he had nothing in his account anyway. After confirming his membership, the next moment the boy's envelope with money flew into the air, and bills started flying out of it, scaring the owner. A message on his phone congratulated the new student on his admission, and the next moment a miniature boy burst right out of the screen. While Kim marveled at the appearance of a creature right out of his phone, the boy asked the owner of the device for his name. He said he would be his mentor at the initial stage. Kim's jaw dropped, and he thought he had hit his head somewhere. The boy with pink eyes was called Mentor, and he was the mentor. Kim was surprised by this name given his status, but the boy kept repeating that he was mentor, his mentor. The boy asked if his mentor was not the same mentor as Odysseus, who turned out to be his first student. Many years have passed since Odysseus became transcendent, but he still occasionally contacts his mentor. In any case, their academy trains people who want to go beyond the capabilities of their race. Kim asked about the direction of the academy, because he wanted to join the hunters, and they are some kind of transcendents. But the kid assured him that he shouldn't even try to compare them, because they are on completely different levels. The boy tried to take the power of the S-class hunters as an example, but the kid said that their mentors could deal with them with one finger. The mentor asked to fill out a form on the phone, so that he could choose a specific area for development. The main areas of focus were combat, production, medicine, intelligence, and art. Having received this data, they will be able to determine the student's current level and inclinations and provide appropriate recommendations. So the boy asked to answer as honestly as possible. Kim chose the direction of battle, but immediately got stuck on the next question. He didn't know what to choose in the skill level section, because there were only options that were too high for him. He wasn't the strongest man in the world, he couldn't clear an entire plane with just one punch, and he couldn't split a mountain into two. The young man said that at this stage, everyone is hesitant about what to choose, so you should choose something that reflects your real capabilities. When he heard that his student could only climb the mountain from above, he wondered how such a loser could even get to the registration. But the mentor told him not to worry, that their academy never expels its students and they stay there forever, so he should just continue answering questions. Kim barely finished the survey and did not understand why there were 100 questions. The mentor wanted to recommend a few mandatory lectures, and even though he had a free pass, they had to analyze his profile first. Since the boy chose a spear as his weapon, the Eastern Keys School would be best suited for him instead of mana cultivation. The great heavenly sage was the best at it, but if the boy couldn't even lift a mountain, it would be too difficult for him. Since Kim had mental wounds in addition to his physical wounds, he should start with the lessons of instructor Siddhartha Gautama. He believed that if the psyche is broken, then all the physical capabilities of the body are nothing more than garbage. Kim was a little surprised by this advice, because it seems that his mentor was referring to the Buddha himself, the founder of Buddhism. Thanks to his lectures on psychology, he was one of the most famous instructors, and his subject became compulsory for passing the Transcendence exam. The boy emphasized that this course is usually expensive, but Siddhartha himself wants to save poor souls. At the end of the lesson, the boy will receive an unshakable heart, which is why this lecture is mandatory in the course, and will help in almost every direction of transcendence. The mentor emphasized that he had to listen to the lecture to the end, even if it seemed like he was going crazy. The guy will understand everything as soon as the class starts, and in the meantime, the mentor will analyze his profile better and contact him later. Kim wanted to ask him something, but the kid immediately disappeared, and it looked like he would have to figure it out on his own. The boy turned on a video in which Siddhartha Gautama asked if you believe in the existence of the world. To Kim, he seemed like a golden statue, not a person. The sage went on to say that the word, I, did not exist, so he did not exist either. He asked that if they had nothing to compare, it meant that something that could not be defined probably did not exist. His words seemed more and more complicated to the boy, and perhaps this is what the mentor was talking about, wishing him success. Gautama continued, saying that this world came into being only at the moment of your birth, and it will die at the moment of your death. We do not exist because we are the world. The boy was falling more and more into the depths of wisdom, and at some point, he thought he was going crazy, so he took a break. The lecture was only a fraction of a percent complete, and Kim's head was no longer cooking. A week later, the therapist was amazed at the speed of the patient's recovery. Even though he was awake, he had never seen anything like it in his 30 years of practice. The boy was already standing on his feet and stretching his whole body. He definitely did not think that, after Gautama's lesson, his heart had experienced peace, and that is what allowed him to recover so quickly. Even though the lesson was just over 1% complete, Kim was pleased with the result and was already thinking about what awaited him when he finished the course. The doctor advised him to spend a few more weeks in the hospital, because it was not known what else could manifest itself, and he agreed with him. The Transcendental Academy was no joke, and Kim could already move his body fully, so he decided not to waste time and watch Chiron's lecture at the same time. It was also compulsory, and upon completion granted the entry-level metamorphosis skill. Although the rank of this skill is too low compared to the unwavering heart, it is still too high for him. Mentor Chiron was a centaur. He was the teacher of Hercules, Theseus, Achilles, and many others in Greek mythology. The purpose of his lecture was to prepare students to a sufficient level to move to the early stages of transcendence. Martial skills would be mentioned only superficially in his course. The boy lay back and listened. He was no longer surprised that the real Chiron could be on his screen. The mentor finished his introductory remarks and was about to announce the first step on the path to transcendence. The next moment, his eyes lit up with blue light, and he was yelling at the little asshole to get his ass out of bed. Kim jumped in surprise, dropping the phone. The voice on the phone continued to order him to move his butt, and the next moment, he received a message with a list of daily activities. The task was adapted to the student and required a lot of physical exercises, including running 30 kilometers. The boy looked at the list and couldn't imagine doing this every day, because he was far from being a Superman. In addition, the doctor insisted on resting for at least another week, so he decided to just skip classes and listen to oral lectures. After choosing the next assignment, his phone suddenly started repeating that an incomplete assignment had been found, and he didn't understand how they could know about it. The news brought Kim down from heaven to earth, although he did not think that 1 week could change anything. He decided to listen to the Buddha's lectures, but this time the timer for his free pass was displayed in the window. He had only 83 days left, and the news sent him jogging right away. He didn't know that the pass was only valid for a certain period of time, although it was not surprising, because it was an academy after all. Kim couldn't run anymore. He realized that he was initially given 90 days, but it was unclear how it worked. He thought that in order to increase his progress, he needed to listen to lectures and complete assignments, but despite this, his scale was stagnant. He even listened to the Buddha's lectures over and over again for a week, but there was no result. Doubts were in his mind, and Kim did not believe he could complete the course in such a short time. Now he has reached the sports ground. Before, when he was dragging monster corpses, he thought that additional sports were unnecessary. For 9 years, he had been dragging 70 kilograms of carcasses, and no additional training was needed. Although he did not know how to use magic, he was confident in his physical strength, so he easily completed the daily norm of 300 push-ups. It even seemed like child's play to him, and he was about to move on to the next task. But when he looked at his daily progress, Kim didn't understand why he was credited with only 81 push-ups when he had completed all 300. He tried again and found out that the rest of the push-ups were not perfect. Pull-ups, sit-ups, and press-ups were also not counted if they were not performed perfectly. The boy did not understand how running was counted, but after the sunset, he managed to fulfill the daily requirement. Kim fell down exhausted in the middle of the street, surprising both old people and children with his behavior. He thought he would not be able to stand it. He was already crying because he didn't have time to listen to the lectures at this pace, but his mentor said that it was not his problem. A few days later, an old woman noticed that the boy was looking better every day and wondered if he was going to train again. He was doing his best, and the woman was proud of him. Meanwhile, The TV in the subway was broadcasting news about the discovery of a level 4 giant. He was found early in the morning, and it turned out that he was hibernating. The monster transportation service did not know this, and so the giant ended up in the city center, where it woke up. Although many people could have died, fortunately, one of the awakened ones was nearby, and he was able to prevent it. It turned out to be a student of the Jain Academy, and his grandmother was happy that the hunters had saved everyone again. She asked the boy if he was also awakened, and that maybe she would see him on TV one day. But Kim didn't think there was anyone on the news, although he caught a disgruntled look from a man reading a newspaper nearby. The guy said it was too hard to get into the hunt today. It was a 1 in a million chance. The old woman continued to watch the news and recalled that in her time everything was completely different. The man with the newspaper asked the boy if he was at least a student at the academy, and if not, he should quit training and just give up. He advised him not to waste his youth on achieving unrealizable dreams, because he would never become a hunter. The grandmother began to interrupt the man, not understanding how he could say such things to a young boy, but he assured her that he just wanted to help. Kim clenched his fist and said that he would decide what he wanted to become, although the man tried to continue, but the boy advised him to get on with his own life. The man kept shouting at the boy that he was rude and should listen to his elders, but Kim thought he was talking nonsense. Still, he is a student of the Transcendental Academy, and in just a week he felt a remarkable effect from the classes. He believed in his abilities and started running and promised himself to become a hunter. A dark-haired girl stood with a sword in front of 2 manticores and reproached her life for being tired of being a hunter. She did not even understand the essence of the academy. Everything was too expensive, there were almost no students, and standing on the corpses of chopped-up monsters, she thought that one could die of boredom. The boy got home and fell on the bed. Although he had been in the hospital for only 2 weeks, his small apartment seemed so cozy. He listened to the dripping of the leaking tap and thought that even though there was still a whole year before the exam, his account was completely empty. He had finished his daily assignment early today and hoped that this time he would be able to catch up on the lectures. When he chose the next task, Chiron was amused to find that his student had finally learned to walk. Although the boy thought he was a baby, his mentor said it was time to take the first steps. The centaur said that the first step to transcendence is feeling. That evening, the boy completed the course with almost 6%. The next morning Kim went to his old place of work. The foreman thought he needed some complicated surgery, but he was already on his feet in a few weeks. But since he was coming back here, he was definitely mentally challenged. When he took him back, the man told him not to do anything like that again, otherwise it would not be so easy next time. In fact, the boy had no choice. He didn't even have anything to eat, and although the boss was firm in his words, he was still worried about him. Kim took a pose in the construction trailer and thought about the money that everything revolved around. Without a job, he would not have food, but with a job, he would not be able to study. He wouldn't even be able to listen to the centaur's lectures without fulfilling his daily exercise requirement. Meanwhile, his old partner came into the trailer, but the boy didn't notice him because he decided to at least review the previous lectures and remember what his mentor had said. Chiron was talking about the key role of the 5 senses in combat. These were the familiar sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Regardless of the sense, we first react to the stimulus, then recognize it, and only then draw a conclusion. The mentor thought these steps were unnecessary and too long, and he wanted to teach his students how to shorten and speed up this process as much as possible. Chiron said that the students would understand something more than their 5 senses. There was something hidden inside them, and it was the 6th sense. His partner came up behind him and jokingly wanted to kick the guy in the ass, saying that he should at least warn him that he was coming, because they hadn't seen each other for a long time. But the guy just dodged the blow without thinking about it. His partner wondered how he did it, because he didn't have any eyes on his back, but Kim was equally surprised. Their conversation was interrupted by the boss, who was driving them to work. His partner asked whether it was worth loading the boy's backpack full at once, because these monster remains weighed over 200 kilograms. Kim said it was fine, and carried the load with a smile. His partners could not handle such zeal, as it seemed that the boy was really okay after the incident with the Minotaur. Kim, on the other hand, felt a surge of energy against the background of the other workers, who were already going on a break. So he decided to at least complete his daily task, because he would have no time left after work. After doing one squat with the weight on his back, he decided to check immediately to see if it counted. When he pulled out his phone, he was surprised to see that one such squat counted as 3 regular squats. His partner called out to the guy to take a break with the others. But he didn't listen. He was happy with the new information, and was already helping with the load to everyone he could. He was glad that it didn't matter what he was doing, only physical activity was important, and he could perform daily strength tasks right during work. Kim picked up even more monster remains for running, and then did push-ups with a loaded backpack. His partner tried to calm his friend down a bit, because he could tear himself up, but he didn't listen and moved on to pull-ups. At the end of the day, Kim was lying exhausted in his bed, and although simultaneous work and training killed one bird with one stone, it was very difficult even for him. But the face of his partner Ajosi was worth it, when his jaw dropped from running, squats, and pull-ups with a fully loaded backpack. In any case, the boy managed to complete all the tasks with a mark and save a lot of time. By 10 o'clock in the evening, he had managed to listen to 2 more lectures and raised his overall level of advancement, enjoying the feeling that he had not wasted his time. Now he wanted to watch the lectures again, but he immediately wondered if he should take an additional course instead. Since the repeated viewing did not affect his overall progress, it seemed like the right idea, and he decided to choose something from the free pass. Professor Seo Joon promised his student to become much stronger to the point where he could lift entire mountains. The boy read the name and recognized the legendary King Heejemun, the ruler of the Western lands, who was known for his superhuman strength. He was one of those who would go 1 against 7. Upon completion of the course, the boy was to receive the skill of the mountain lifting spear, and since the course was free, he decided to register. The student's joy was interrupted by the first message from the instructor, who openly mocked him, because the one who chooses such a course does not even know the basics. And if he wanted to master such a weapon while being so insignificant, he was just ridiculous. Nevertheless, he promised to teach me the art of the spear, and the instructor told me not to listen to that monkey with a stick and just wave my spear. He had to feel the weapon with every cell of his body, understand the spear with his whole soul, and only then return to him for instructions. The boy received a new task that adapted to him on the fly. He was surprised to see 0 out of 5,000 spear strokes, and because the instructor said only a few words during the entire lecture. In fact, every instructor thought he was a brat who was good for nothing, and every lecture began like this. The next day, the dark-haired girl with the sword asked Kim's boss about the company's affairs. He assured her that they had no problems, and that there had been no accidents due to good management. The girl was a B-class huntress. Her name was Park Seo Young. She asked if he had heard about the giant that was hibernating, and although she had personally verified its death, she still wanted to conduct a detailed check. The workers were surprised by the condescending behavior of the boss in front of the unknown lady, and tried to understand who she was. Meanwhile, the boy was unloading the remains, and only the words that she could be the granddaughter of the legendary star sword, Park Minchul, stopped him. 100 years ago, this man was one of the first to awaken his power with that celestial rift. At that time, almost nothing was known about such special people. Monsters were more cruel then, and roamed the streets with impunity in search of prey. One could only dream about the survival of humanity. The swordsman was one of those who saved ordinary people from certain death. At that time, Park Minchul was one of the few who did not allow his civilization to disappear from the face of the earth. He was one of the heroes who saved the world, and now he was quite old but still in shape. The old man could be a heavyweight in his field, and even now, he could compete with anyone. Kim finished his thoughts, because he didn't even care, and began to pick up as many manticore remnants as he could lift. The girl asked her boss what was wrong with this guy, but the boss told her to ignore it. While they were discussing that he had been like this for a week and must have gone crazy, the guy was doing squats with the load. His partner tried to talk to him and asked when he would finally calm down, but the guy kept doing squats and said that he just had to find out what would happen at the end of the course he had already started. Kim said that he really saw the point in these tasks, and his partner argued that the only point was that he would die faster. But if he had already brought the bodies, then let him dump them and get out of here. Kim happily promised to bring more, but the next moment he heard movement behind his partner. One of the manticores flew into the air, with severe wounds. It had escaped from the remains of the other monsters, and could even fly. The beast snarled at Ajos, who fell to the ground in surprise and fright. Meanwhile, the dark-haired girl was glad to be rid of her annoying boss, even though he had sent her to a boring office instead of the dirty playground with monster bodies. The other workers whispered about whether she was really the granddaughter of the Star Sword, and even though they were far away from her, she could hear them. The workers discussed her low skill level. For a granddaughter of a hero, she only had AB class. Although her grandfather was a hero to many, for her, it was a burden and a label she could not get rid of. She was taught to be a hunter from the time she was in her cradle, but the bar she was set was simply unattainable for her. All her life, she was compared to her ancestor, and her real dream was to teach people. Her grandfather did not want to hear anything about it. He demanded that she never mention her fiction about teaching again. Because of his status, she could not live a normal life. Eventually, they came together somewhere in the middle, and she was able to found a hunter academy. But everything did not go according to her plan, because when people heard the name of the Star Sword and saw a girl, they decided that they were deceived and left. Even those who stayed could not stand the old man's threats, and left the academy as well. Because of all this, no one had even heard of her academy, and she dreamed of at least one worthy student who would change everything. It was at this moment that panic broke out, and the workers shouted to get out of here, because there was a monster on the site. His partner shouted to the boy to run away and save himself, but the boy realized that Ajosi was going to die. Neither a mere mortal, nor even an awakened one who cannot use magic, can defeat a fourth-level monster. Kim knew that even a professional hunter would have a hard time, but he wished one of them was here right now. It was as if that girl had been a hunter, but now she had disappeared. The boy had no choice but to act on his own, otherwise his friend would be gobbled up in front of him. Throwing off his backpack and grabbing the rebar, the boy screaming ran at the monster. He only managed to drive the manticore away from his partner, because the latter dodged such a simple blow. Kim ordered him to run away, and to do it quickly, because otherwise they would be eaten together. Left alone with the monster, the boy hoped to hold out as long as possible until the hunters arrived. Kim tried not to be afraid and not to stand like a pillar. Pulling himself together, he remembered the words of his mentors. He was the universe. He needed to observe the world and learn its origins and its essence. The boy had to embrace the entire universe and understand its movement and put aside emotions. The manticore rushed at the boy, but the frantic pounding of his heart had already subsided, and the centaur's words about relying on his instincts instead of thinking saved his neck from the sharp claws of the attacker. The boy immediately increased the distance by jumping, trying not to think, and dodging the manticore's poisonous tail. Pushing off the ground with his improvised spear, he soared above the monster, relying only on his senses. It looked like he was now in the monster's blind spot, but he didn't know what to do. The boy recalled the words of the Hegemon King, who said that strength alone would not be enough to lift a mountain. You need to believe that you can cut the mountain in half, and not doubt yourself for a single moment. It takes courage and a will to win, and Kim believed that he not only could, but he had to. This was the force that could move mountains. The boy gathered all his strength in one blow and swung the rebar right on the monster's head, causing a cloud of dust to rise on the sight. The girl ran toward him among the fleeing workers and asked what had happened and what kind of explosion it was. When the dust cleared, she saw a guy with a rebar and a monster that had been cut into pieces. Kim himself could not believe what he saw. Somehow it all worked. The progress of his lectures increased significantly after the manticore was returned. Park Hyun didn't understand what had just happened, because some handyman who hadn't even been to the academy, with a rebar instead of a real weapon, could do this. Kim walked past the young lady and rushed to his friend, asking if he was okay. Ajashi was unharmed and was also surprised by the boy's actions, but he reminded him of his daily training that everyone had seen before. The boss immediately appeared out of nowhere next to the girl and assured her that they had definitely checked this monster, but it was clear that they had made a mistake. Meanwhile, the other partners, except for Ajosi, came over to encourage the boy and praise him for his feat. The girl didn't listen to the boss's excuses at all, but just looked at the boy and saw him as the perfect student. At the end of the shift, the boss ordered them not to tell anyone about the incident and praised everyone for their work. Kim advised his partner to go to the hospital just in case and went home. The guy looked again at today's progress in the lectures and did not understand how it worked, because the level did not increase after many times of repeated viewing. It seemed that the victory over the monster had moved him forward significantly, and it was better to see once than hear 1,000 times. It turned out that practice was the best way to move forward, but to get even a temporary license, you had to be at least a student of the academy. The Transcendent Academy could not issue him a license, which meant that he would have to save up money for the academy from the beginning. His thoughts were interrupted by a girl behind him, who asked for a few minutes. The boy recognized her. She was the same huntress who worked with his company, and she was the granddaughter of Star Sword. He agreed to listen to her, and she immediately wanted to get to the point and asked if he would like to meet her grandfather. The passers-by were surprised to hear such a question from a well-known girl, but they were even more surprised by the boy's answer. Kim indifferently replied that he didn't want to, and just walked away. The girl was sure of the opposite, and asked him to wait. The boy was going to get home as soon as possible and start listening to the lectures, because the sun was already setting. The dark-haired woman introduced herself, saying that she was 31 years old, and she reflected that she had never encountered anything like this before, and did not know how to behave. Kim listened to her proposal, and didn't understand why he would join an academy that was only on paper. This guy seemed strange to her with his training, but even if his manticora was severely weakened, it was still a level 4 monster, and he had cut a monster apart. He was definitely going to become a hunter, and she tried to offer him equipment and everything he needed to train, even though she had no teachers, but she could be a mentor. Kim refused her anyway, saying that he did not need any mentors. The girl had only one trump card left, and in desperation, she offered to meet the legendary Star Sword. But the boy wasn't interested in that either, while all the other hunters dreamed of meeting him. She wasn't going to let him go so easily and reminded him of the written part of the exam, but the boy said he would manage somehow on his own. Then the girl asked about the dungeon, which required a license to go to, and he was just wasting his time because he couldn't get one without being in the academy. Kim said that her academy doesn't matter anyway. Without government approval, she can't issue licenses. Yoon replied that her academy had already been approved and he could go to the dungeon tomorrow. Hearing this, the boy finally stopped. The girl decided not to let this moment pass and additionally offered him independent training, and she would provide him with a place to train and not charge him a single penny. The guy finally came back to her, but he didn't believe in free cheese and a mousetrap and wanted to know her true intentions. The dark-haired woman asked him to represent her academy at competitions until he became a hunter, and to tell her where he was studying. It was a very good offer, but Kim wanted to know why him. The girl told him that she saw potential in him, and that was enough for him, so he extended his hand to meet her. The next day his phone rang. His boss was fired from the company. Mr. Manchul was sure that it was because of the boy, and after killing the mantis, he did ask the dark-haired girl, who apologized for her short-sightedness, to refuse to work with their company because of his boss. He could not have imagined that he would be fired immediately, but he had to answer on the phone that he had nothing to do with it, and that the boss had probably quit on his own, not wanting to be held accountable for yesterday's incident. The woman did not believe that he could have left on his own, but the main thing was that he was no longer here, and it seemed that everyone was happy about it. Kim was on his way to the academy, where Yoon met him. She immediately handed him a temporary license that had been in effect since yesterday. At first, he was hesitant, but she really arranged everything very quickly, and even though he hadn't become a professional hunter yet, it was the first step towards his dream. Kim asked her to tell him how to go on raids, but the girl said that there was no need. She prepared different types of spears for the boy and asked him to choose the right one, and right after that they would go to the dungeon together. Yoon had already signed the contract because she thought he would be okay with it. They walked through the fenced area to the portal and entered. As soon as they were in the dungeon, a giant rat immediately rushed at them, but he was immediately hit in the head with a spearhead and fell to the ground. The boy, having finished the blow, asked why Yoon had gone with him, as she had allegedly promised to leave him alone. The girl promised not to interfere, but she could not leave her only student unattended. She proudly declared that such individual lessons were very rare for beginners, and the boy took it as an honor. Since it was his first time here, she would be his lifeline. There are only kobolds here, but he shouldn't relax. Even though they are only of the second level, they are good for training beginners. The boy was glad that his punches easily penetrated the kobold's magical armor, just like the manticore the day before. But in reality, attacks not imbued with mana should simply bounce off their defenses. The next moment, one of the beasts rushed at the boy from behind. His mentor was already grabbing her sword and warning him of the danger, but the boy easily ducked under its jump and a second later hit the attacker with his spear. Although his attack should not have been so effective, his progress in the course increased even against such opponents, although not as much as from killing the manticore. While the boy gleefully stared at the phone screen, Yoon stood there with her sword half drawn, looking at him in surprise. Since he could make good money in the dungeons, he decided to speed up and attack several kobolds himself, reminding him of a video game with experience. When Kim returned from the dungeon, he was stuck on his phone again, sitting on the floor. She didn't understand what this fool was doing, and was even scared, because he was mumbling something about the need to stay away from Hydra venom. She didn't understand why he had been staring at his turned-off phone for several hours since he came home, ignoring her. But worse, the newcomer was slaying monsters like a trained professional. He even threw one of the monsters into her arms, since she was not doing anything, and grabbed the corpses of the others, and happily performed some exercises. The guy could have called a special service for this, but decided to carry the corpses himself to save money. Yoon realized that she could not hide her student from the old man for long, but it was too much for her. Kim tried to listen to some lectures even at midnight, and she was already doubting her choice. The next morning, the boy's face was shining. His bank account had grown significantly after one trip to the dungeon. It wasn't easy, because he had to carry the carcasses himself and process them himself, which surprised his mentor even more. It would have been fine, but it took too much time, and he never had time to listen to the lectures. Now he was thinking about offering cooperation to his work partner. The guy trusted him, and if he opened his own business, everyone would benefit. He had to decide what to do with the money he had earned. Although he could save it again, it would be better to spend it on something useful now. He was making good money clearing dungeons, and at the same time improving his progress in the lectures, but it was slower than he expected. He hadn't gotten any experience for his last kobold, and he needed a way to get stronger faster. Kim would like to crush mountains, like the great sage of heaven with his staff. Suddenly, In the middle of the street, he shouted Sun Wuken's name, which scared the passers-by. The boy was able to see only a part of his lecture, but at the time, he had no money and could not afford it. So he decided to enroll in the Monkey Man's course on the basics of staff and spear fighting. But the next moment, his enthusiasm waned as the phone showed a figure of 27 billion, which even a Class C hunter couldn't earn. There was nothing to do, and it was too little time anyway, so Kim decided to see what else the academy was selling. He continued to sit on the ground, looking at his phone, which surprised passers-by. When he opened the shop, he couldn't believe his eyes. Among the items and elixirs was the shield of Aegis, used by Zeus and Athena, and even the spear of Longinus, which a Roman soldier used to strike Christ himself. Even if these items were replicas, they were still legendary items, and it was strange to see them in training gear. All the equipment was made by the students of the Transcendental Academy, but the boy could not believe that such legendary items could be obtained so easily. He immediately wanted to buy a Longinus spear, and an individualized price calculation began. Without reading the exorbitant amount, Kim did push-ups with great speed. Yoon was just passing by and wondered why he was training so hard. The boy knew that the weapon would be expensive and was counting on several million. But the number on the phone screen was 100 million, and it just didn't fit in his head because he had nowhere to get that kind of money. In addition, the weapons he bought could not be resold because Kim was already thinking of taking out a loan. At some point, the guy just froze with the thought that everything was about money again. Even this 100 million was too much money, and what can we say about the value of the 27 billion exchange rate, which he would probably never see, nor the lectures of the great sage. The girl tried to get through to him and asked him to give her at least a minute. She told him about the tournament of academies and asked if he knew anything about them. The boy had only heard about it, but had never been interested in the details. Yoon said that each academy wanted to prove that their institution was the best, and that the level of the academy itself was more important. She handed the boy the papers with the terms and conditions, and said that their academy was now at the 4th level. If he did well in the battle against the monsters, he would be able to move the academy up the pyramid. The higher the level of the institution, the more support it receives from the government, and so the best of the best were sent to the competition. Kim had already guessed what she was going to say, but Yoon wanted him to participate for their academy. At that moment, the boy was only concerned about whether participating in the competition would somehow advance him in the course of the Transcendental Academy, and it seemed that the tournament would also be considered a practice. So Kim immediately agreed, which made his mentor happy and couldn't believe what he heard. But he said that this was what they had agreed on, and immediately began to ask about the details of the tournament. But until the tournament started, everything was kept secret, and as far as the girl knew, the winner would be the person with the most points for the raid and duel. The boy thought about dueling, because all he had experienced was one manticore and a bunch of kobolds, and he had no idea what awaited him in a battle with a human. There was nothing to do. He had signed up for it himself, but he didn't know if anyone would want to train with him. A good idea popped into his head, and the next moment his eyes were on his mentor. And since she was not doing anything, the boy asked if she would train with him. The girl picked up a training sword and did not understand what she was doing, and the boy was amused by her appearance. But it was a great opportunity in his opinion. Even if she was not a top-class warrior, she was still being trained by the Star Sword himself. Yoon took the fighting stance with complete seriousness, and the boy just started squealing with joy, because he had long wanted to know what she was capable of. She asked him if he knew she was a B-class huntress, and he asked her to give him a head start and prepare for battle. Yoon agreed, taking one hand off her sword and telling the boy to start as soon as he was ready. He rushed forward with his spear, shouting that such an offer was not to be refused, but the next moment his attack was easily deflected aside. She had expected something better, and though his movements were fast enough, they were still rash and his attacks were easily read. Yoon was already upset that she had overestimated him. because he had seemed more skilled in the dungeon. But the newcomer was only a newcomer, and it was unclear why he thought he could compete with her. The girl repelled another attack and was preparing to end the fight with a single blow by channeling mana into the blade of her weapon, but her sword was blocked by the spear. The boy could barely hold back the blow, gritting his teeth against the girl's heavy attack. She didn't understand how he did it, because his weapon should have just jumped out of his hands, and her sword was at his throat. Having held back his mentor's blow, the boy increased the distance by jumping, just like in the fight with the manticore. Kim wiped the blood from his lip and said that in this case he would fight to the fullest. He rushed into the attack, and his movements became faster and more precise at the same time. The boy had deliberately started with obvious attacks, as described in the lectures of the Transcendental Academy. Then he had to add distractions, but neither of them should be too obvious. His opponent is not a pillar, and after reading the movements will begin to change his tactics. Obvious strikes will be met with obvious blocks, and when the attack is repelled, you need to resort to a deceptive maneuver and open up. The boy has to repeat this until the opponent opens up for his real attack, and when the moment comes, he has to put all his strength into a single blow. The girl recognized the danger of his last blow by deflecting it, but the next moment, she screamed as her opponent lay dented into the wall. She unintentionally hit him with all her might without thinking, and was running to the student, who was still lying down. The boy got up and said he was fine, but in the end, he lost. Yun asked him if he really thought he could defeat a Class B hunter, and he agreed that it would not work to fight her like a monster. She didn't know how to react to this answer. At that moment, the boy's phone rang, and he was happy to see the progress of his course. As expected, the battle with his mentor had pushed him further, and he simultaneously asked if she was free for the tournament. Kim wanted to train when there were no raids, which surprised the girl. Even though he got beaten badly after the first training session, he immediately asked for another one and wanted to continue fighting with her. Now she thought of him differently. His strange behavior didn't matter because he was trying so hard. Yun agreed to help and promised to practice with him every night. In addition, if he won the tournament, he would receive all the prize money. The words about the prize money especially encouraged the boy. When the girl tried to recall the amount of the prize fund and mentioned 100,000, Kim immediately saw Longina's spear in his mind's eye. The guy was excited and asked the surprised girl when the tournament would be held. When he heard that it would be in 2 weeks, his eyes lit up even more, and he demanded sandbags and then some heavy stuff to break off, because it would be ineffective. He rushed past the girl, who didn't realize that her hair was blowing as if in the wind. He broke off a piece of the wall and started training with it, while the girl screamed at him for what he was doing. When she calmed down, she said that the sandbags were in the corner, and the boy was frantically thanking her for them. Jun did not understand anything, and in his head, there were only those 100,000 that were definitely supposed to be his. 2 weeks later, a crowd gathered around the arena. Some came for the hot dog show, and some were reassured as the pride of their academy. The guy with the glasses and the tube was glad to finally get there, but he didn't expect such a crowd. He said out loud that although there were many hunters, it was rare to see fights between them. And such an event could not do without recruiters from academies and people from the government. The people around him did not understand where this sport came from, and why he was explaining it to everyone. He remembered that he was in a hurry and headed for the waiting room for the tournament participants, asking one of the event's assistants for directions. Entering the room with a whole crowd, the guy just froze with excitement that he had come alone and now could not move. The other participants had great equipment, some even showed off their muscles, and everyone seemed confident. Everyone looked so strong, but it was not surprising, because the best of the best were here. But the next moment his eyes fell on a skinny guy with a spear sitting on a bench in a simple tracksuit reading something. It turned out that he was stuck on his phone. His weapon was old, and its sheath was made of an old t-shirt. Immediately, we heard mocking conversations. It seemed that this guy was from some shitty academy that was trying to make a name for itself somehow. The guy with the glasses thought he must have been forced to participate. He definitely heard everything and tried to ignore it, but his phone wasn't even on. The voices around him kept mocking him, saying that he should just pack his things and go home, and that he had wasted his time traveling so far. The boy with the tube saw him as his brother. He recognized him when he came to his new class and tried to pretend to be busy as if he were texting a non-existent friend. That's how Kim looked at his eyes now, and he sympathized with him, and he was also all alone here. The guy with the glasses decided to come over and say hello. He said he was also participating in the tournament and introduced himself as Lee Minji. Kim Seo Joon introduced himself in return and was happy for him to join him on the bench. The new acquaintance seemed very young, and it looked like even high school students were participating in the competition. Meanwhile, one of the participants started shouting at the other, and Minji knew the thug in the helmet. He is a student of Gochuri Academy. Jang Park-chul was their hope. The guy relied on strength in everything, as indicated by his giant axe behind his shoulders and the way he spoke. He would yell at the guy across from him to finally get out when asked. The guy with the scar on his eye, whose name was Lee Chulmin, was not going to listen to him, and did not understand why he started the fight. It looked like his head was completely overgrown with muscles, since he started shouting. The guy with the glasses was talking about the best student at Mid Academy, the one with the scar on his eye, who fought with twin daggers. Kim looked at his new friend in surprise, and sincerely did not understand why he was telling him all this. He was probably one of those boring people who knew everything about everything. In the midst of the quarrel, another participant asked them to be quiet, and they immediately fell silent. A red-haired guy approached them and told them that they were not alone. It was a student of the Revenant Academy. Kim was amazed at how quickly he calmed them down, and his new friend told him that he was Lee Ju-hwan, and that he was actually the winner of this tournament. Kim was surprised to hear that he was the winner and not a participant. He usually doesn't take part in tournaments unless something happened at his academy, and he's here of his own free will, because he didn't see the point of fighting weaklings like them. But since he's here, the winner is obvious. The guy with the glasses asked if Kim had heard of the Star's Sword, and he said that there was probably no one who hadn't. Agreeing with this statement, the new friend said that the granddaughter of the Star's Sword himself had invited him to his academy, but he refused. Kim asked him if he was talking about Seo Joon, but he hadn't heard of him at all and continued to wonder about his level of self-confidence to turn down such a request. Kim knew the real reason for his refusal, because he didn't have any students, nor did any other teacher. The next moment, the red-haired man exploded in anger himself, kicking the trash can. He hated that he had to fight with such lowlifes. It was only his uncle's wish, but winning such a tournament would not bring him any recognition. An accidental victory over trash wouldn't make him any better. If he had only known how things would turn out, he would have accepted the offer of that damn granddaughter of the Star's Sword. He wasn't going to fall for her words about her great talent, and he didn't realize what kind of academy she had. But then he didn't realize that he could have just used her and then just gotten rid of her. He noticed Kim's gaze on him, and didn't understand to what level the tournament had sunk if such plebeians were allowed to participate. But all he could think about was how much experience he could gain from fighting this guy. The next moment, the first stage of the academy tournament was announced, and the participants had to get ready. Kim got up from the bench and moved forward. He had been trying to reach at least a third of Seong Yu's lecture course for 2 weeks, but he hadn't noticed any special changes in his strength. The further he progressed, the smaller the difference seemed to be between the level he had reached and the previous one. Compared to the others, he clearly lacked experience, although he tried to compensate for this by constantly going to dungeons and fighting with Seo Joon. Now he just had to gather his will into a fist, and it didn't matter whether he was facing a monster or a human. The boy made it to the first stage, and he promised himself to get the 100,000. The first test was a race in a maze. The crowd was going crazy in front of the big screen because they had just announced the start of the first stage of the tournament. A guy with a camera was calling out to his friend that he was almost late, and he said that he could have chosen a seat not in the corner and bumped into a girl in a cap on the way. He began to apologize, and she tried to hide her face and assured him that everything was fine and moved away from him. The man joined his friend, looking back at her, and the latter asked if she was someone he knew. The man did not know her, but she reminded him of someone. The race in the maze had just started, and the only rule was not to attack other participants. Without any other details, it was unclear what the participants were being tested for, whether it was a test of their ability to navigate or whether they wanted to test their intuition. The fourth-level competition clearly did not involve something so simple that anyone with more luck could easily win. The friends thought that there must be some monsters there, and the next moment various creatures appeared on the screen near the participants. A thug with a giant axe was already running screaming at a minotaur, and behind the guy with the scar, someone's horns were glistening. The man remarked that this year's participants were quite strong, and the next moment the guy with the camera was shouting to his friend, Sungbei, to look at the other screen. There, a red-haired boy was easily tearing apart a giant bear, and the crowd was delighted. Sungbei was surprised because he didn't look like a student. The guy with the camera didn't know much about it all, but the guy was incredible. His friends said that it was Lee Juhwan, and the dark-haired girl shouted that he was not here at all, and the next moment hid from the gaze of her friends. She wanted to watch the tournament in peace and didn't want to be recognized as the granddaughter of Star Sword. She was wondering how her student was doing, and Kim was testing the walls for strength and realized that he couldn't break through them and would have to move like everyone else. If he had only known that he would end up in such a place, he would have chosen the lectures of Theseus, who once defeated a minotaur and got out of the maze. The boy could have broken one wall if he had the power to lift mountains, but from Theseus' lectures, he could have learned a few life hacks for navigating such places. The boy reached a fork in the road, and he had a plan to keep to one side, so he could definitely get to the end of the maze. The only question was when he would do it. He decided to go to the left, but suddenly he was overcome by a strange, indescribable feeling. Kim could not understand why, but it seemed to him that it was better to choose another specific path among all the others. Perhaps this was the same sixth sense Chiron had mentioned. He thought about it for a while, but decided to trust his intuition. The next moment, it was announced that one of the participants was eliminated, which meant that the others were fighting with something, but for some reason everything was quiet. It seemed that his intuition allowed him to avoid monsters. He was already dreaming about completing the course and getting the metamorphosis skill. Maybe then, he would be able to predict the future. But the next moment, his new friend appeared behind him. The guy with glasses called him brother, and Kim had to end his dreams, because that doesn't happen anyway. His new partner was back at it again, warning him that monsters could be around every corner. Kim could only nod in response, thinking that he had met only him out of all the monsters. The guy with glasses asked him how he walked so confidently, and when he heard that Kim walked as soon as he thought of it, he said that he could not do that and he would lead because he knew how to get out. The guy told Kim the same one-handed rule, completely forgetting about the time for such walks. Kim suggested that they just trust their feelings, but the guy assured them that they would definitely get lost. Kim said to split up in that case, and didn't understand why his partner was attached to him at all. The guy with the glasses called him his brother in misfortune, because he also came to the tournament on his own, not from the academy, and looking at him, the guy decided that he was his soul mate. Minji said that it was better for weaklings to stick together, and now Kim understood why he had spoken to him at all, but it was strange to him that he looked like a weakling from the outside. The partner decided to show his brother in misfortune something special, and taking out his phone, he showed a photo of his sister, who looked exactly like him, and asked if she was beautiful. Kim said that she was very beautiful, and he turned around and started to walk away, when his new friend grabbed his leg and begged him not to leave. He asked him to stay together, and Kim realized that he would have been scared at his age. Although the boy talked too much, He told a lot of useful things about the other participants, and at the same time he was a participant in the tournament, and therefore his rival at the same time. Kim asked him why he said he was alone, because he must have come to support his parents and sister, whose photo he had just shown. The boy said that he had no one else, and that his parents had died long ago. Kim realized that he had said the wrong thing without thinking, and was already regretting it, remembering how hard it was for him after the loss of his parents. The guy with the glasses was apologizing himself, saying that his sister was too young to come here alone. Kim mentally agreed that they were brothers in misfortune, and offered to move together if he wanted to. However, he warned his new partner that they were not a team at all, and that he would get the first place prize. Kim moved forward, leaving the frozen boy behind, and the next moment he was already catching up with him, shouting where he was going. But since the boy had agreed to go along, he should follow him. Minji didn't understand his partner's self-confidence and lack of doubt. He just walked forward without hesitation, as if he knew where he was going. The guy with the glasses could barely keep up with Kim, who seemed to be in a dead end because there was no way through. Kim was looking at the wall in front of him, trying to feel something with his hand, and the next moment he pushed it. The wall opened like a door, and this surprised his partner even more. But now it was the guy with the spear who was surprised, as the voice of the tournament commentator announced the winner of the first stage, who was still frozen with his hand outstretched to the door. He had set a new record for the level, completing it almost 3 times faster than the last record time. Seo Joon's friends on the stand could not believe their eyes. Someone had coped with the task too quickly, and it must have been the red-haired Lee Ju-hwan. But he had a battle in full swing on another monitor, and the next moment, Seo Joon was in shock. The face of a student of her academy was displayed on the main screen, but he himself was not happy about such a waste of time, because he had not met a single monster and had not advanced in his studies at all. The guy with the glasses was thinking about how lucky he was to have Kim, even though he wanted to work with him as a team, but their meeting in the maze was completely accidental. He was now the second person to complete the level, right after his partner, and he was ahead of even the red-haired guy who held the previous record. The partner sat waiting on the same bench where they met, and the other participants discussed the impossibility of completing the level so quickly. None of them had ever heard of his Manhwa Academy, and they were already whispering about whether he was the son of some powerful man. Everyone thought that the red-haired guy would win, but he came in third. Kim tried to ignore the noise around him, but he couldn't concentrate on the lecture. The red-haired boy stood right in front of him and looked silently at the guy with the spear. The people around him froze in anticipation of some kind of spectacle, and Kim himself looked at him, waiting for some words. But he just looked at him with disdain for a while longer, and the next moment, walking away, he said that he was just lucky, which even disappointed the other participants, because there was no spectacle. These words were echoed by others, who also thought that his victory could not be explained in any other way, and the insignificance of his academy only reinforced these thoughts. Someone else would have liked to have been so lucky, but the next moment, the noise was interrupted by one of the organizers who appeared at the door. The guy with the papers was going to explain the conditions of the next stage to the participants. At this stage, they were going to duel, but since they were all at the 4th level, it was decided to ban the use of mana on weapons, and only to strengthen their bodies to balance the odds. The judge would stop the fight if one of the participants was unable to continue the duel. They had to fight 5 rounds, as 32 people made it to the 2nd stage. Kim was wondering who he would be paired with, and the organizers were about to start drawing up the standings, but one of the participants decided to withdraw from the tournament. Seo Joon, meanwhile, continued to avoid unnecessary stares, and was glad that she was able to somehow escape after shouting her student's name, which attracted a lot of attention and almost got her recognized. She couldn't believe he was going to win, and now she was going to wait until it died down and go back to the stands. There was a ruckus at the registration table, men trying to find out why the dueling stage had immediately moved to the semifinals. It turned out that many of them refused to fight other people. The men were outraged because they had just had all their fun ruined, and there was no point in betting on the fights anymore. The man at the front desk laughed at them, because betting was out of the question, because everyone knew that the red-haired boy would win. But the crowd was gambling, and the men were not interested in this participant, because the odds were too low if he won. The organizer assured them that no one with a head on their shoulders would even think of betting on someone else, but the next moment someone handed him a suitcase. Dropping it with a thud on the table, the hooded man announced a bet of 100,000 on a participant named Seo Joon. Even before this moment, the gamblers were now shouting that this was stupid because the guy was just lucky, and no one had ever heard of his academy before. The person in the purple cloak was enveloped in lilac streams of mana, and Yoon would really like to know who it was. Meanwhile, Kim was unable to concentrate on the lectures and was dying of boredom. A moment ago, one of the participants raised his hand and refused to continue participating in the tournament, the guy with glasses explaining to his surprised partner that this was not uncommon in fourth-level tournaments, as the winners were essentially known in advance. No one wanted to fight the red-haired boy, because he didn't play by the rules and a fight with him could end in a lifelong injury, and because of their low level, no one would care. And besides the tournament favorite, there were other strong participants. Few wanted to become fodder for them to promote their already well-known academies, so many decided to just give up. One by one, the participants began to raise their hands and refuse to fight, and their partners did not know how to react, until only 5 people remained who did not refuse. Apart from the partners on the bench, the 2 who had been arguing at the beginning of the competition, and the one who had calmed them down with a word were the most resilient. A guy in a helmet with a giant axe was mocking all these weaklings, and the next moment a loudspeaker announced his participation in the duel with Kim. The next pair would be a red-haired guy and a guy with glasses. While the guy with the scar gets an automatic victory in this round. Kim's partner was now shaking with emotion. He tried to calm him down, but he couldn't behave so coolly before the duel. Min-ji grabbed hold of Kim and shouted that he would fight Ju-hwan himself. Kim asked him why he was writing down his defeat before the fight even started, but his partner was desperate and just knew how it would end. Then Kim advised him to just give up, but he couldn't. The first couple of participants were called to the arena. Kim stood up and advised his partner to go all the way if he had already decided to fight. The guy with the glasses grabbed Kim's arm, asking him how he could not be worried. But for the guy with the spear, the only thing that mattered was how much experience he would gain from this fight. Kim left his partner, who did not understand anything, behind, and went to meet his reward of 100,000. The first participants of the second round stood in the middle of the arena. The commentator announced the continuation of the 63rd Academy tournament and said that the most persistent participants remained. He was introducing a new mysterious record holder of the maze, who managed not to meet a single monster, and the man wondered if it was just luck or maybe his talent. At the same time, the boy was greeting the audience with his hand, wondering if his mentor was here. From the opposite side came a smug shout that no amount of luck would help the boy. The commentator of the fight introduced his opponent to the audience. The axe of the giant from the Gochuri Academy would crush any tricks or gimmicks into dust. Meanwhile, he was mocking Kim, because he won the first stage, and now he would be the first to be eliminated. It seems that his luck had turned away from him this time. Kim said with a smile that they couldn't know yet, because it was too early to tell which of them was unlucky, which angered his opponent. The judge announced the beginning of the fight, and the giant with the axe rushed forward. He was going to make his opponent regret his words, but he just stood still. The guy with the glasses was worried about his partner, and watched the beginning on the monitor, but he immediately turned his attention to the red-haired man. Now was not the time to worry about anyone else, because he himself would have to fight this monster, who was now calmly propping up the wall. Min-ji was shaking with fear again, but he remembered his partner's words that he should fight to the end, and maybe he would even win. He could not contain his fear. Clenching his fist, He thought that he was simply no match for the participants from the most famous academies. Maybe he should give up before it was too late. The next moment, his thoughts were interrupted by the events on the monitor. The guy with the scar's jaw dropped from what he saw, and the red-haired man even stood up from the wall. The commentator of the fight saw something incredible. The fight was over in a split second, and the winner was a student of the Manhwa Academy. Kim's face was broadcast on the screen, standing over his opponent, who was on the ground in front of him. The red-haired man looked at this, and said that he belonged among the lowly, and the next moment turned his gaze to the boy with glasses. The latter stood up, katana in hand, and met his piercing gaze. A moment ago, the boy with the axe was screaming and flying at Kim, lifting it above him. The commentator said that he expected nothing less. The big guy made a crushing blow, but his opponent easily dodged it. It seemed that luck was still on the side of the winner of the first level, and the big guy was surprised himself, because the guy dodged with incredible ease when he was giving it his all. The opponent with the spear didn't seem to take him seriously, and he was already sweating, but none of his attacks worked. The giant got angry and his weapon glowed with mana. He wanted to see how he could dodge this time. But the boy with the spear easily deflected his blow with one hand so that the axe flew into the sky, leaving the attacker weaponless. The big guy stared at his empty hands in surprise, his axe whistling somewhere behind him. He fell to the ground and stared at his opponent in astonishment, unable to believe that he had lost. Meanwhile, the commentator was announcing the winner's name, and the audience went wild. Kim left the arena in disappointment, checking his progress on his phone. He thought that he would get much more for fighting a human, and besides, many people refused to participate further, so there would be very few fights. His free pass would expire in less than 2 months, and at this rate, he would not have time to complete any of the 3 courses he had started. He managed to complete 2 of them only a third of the way through, and one didn't even make a tenth of the progress. He was going to start saving as much as possible to save up for Longina's spear and extend his pass to study. He just needed this victory. Opening the door of the waiting room, his calm thoughts were interrupted by the shout of his new friend. He was delighted with the guy's victory. He hadn't expected him to be so strong. Almost immediately after Kim, the organizer came in and told him to get ready for the next tournament participants. The guy with the glasses became wary, and the red-haired man finally stopped propping up the wall and moved forward. As he passed by his opponent, he pushed him with his shoulder and ordered the lowlife to get out of the way. Minji just sighed and asked his friend if he remembered what he had said in the maze, that they should stick together. He saw him then as a kindred spirit, and when he won the fight, he was happy for himself, but also envious of him. The boy with the glasses was never lucky and had no special talent, and he was not strong. He only wanted to make his little sister proud, but the next moment his name was called and he had to hurry. Kim just told him to do his best, and he ran to the arena. The names of the participants of the next fight were displayed on the monitor, and the guy with the glasses tried to calm himself down. While he was telling himself that he could do it, the red-haired man demanded that he shut up, because his whining was already annoying. In fact, he was annoyed by everything. He felt incredibly humiliated to participate in such a circus. The judge reminded the participants of the rules of the fight, and the red-haired man could not believe that this weakling would fight against him. He was even holding his katana awkwardly. Looking at him, he saw only prey. An innocent deer, whose fate was to be only prey, whose place was at the very bottom of the food pyramid, in the mouth of a tiger. The red-haired boy thought that he was just lucky in the maze, and needed to put him in his place, that he himself should have won both stages, because he was a head taller than each of these bastards. The next moment, the boy with the glasses swung the scabbard off his katana and confidently thrust it forward. This pissed off the red-haired man even more. He was laughing that he believed he could fight him at all. He stood there with his two-handed sword and couldn't wait to start, asking the judge when they would finally begin. The commentator began to announce the start of the second fight. Mingy mentally relied on his friend's words, and the red-haired man hated the insignificance of this action. He was going to end the fight with one punch, and as soon as the start of the fight was announced, he rushed forward. The guy with the glasses barely kept his sword from the unexpected swift attack and continued to defend himself. The commentator was delighted with the attacker. He lived up to all expectations of the fight, attacking his opponent with a flurry of fierce blows. Mingy could do nothing but defend himself, and it seemed that he would not last long. The red-haired man was not going to stop. He ordered the bastard to get out of the way and keep his head down, and the next moment he stabbed the enemy in the chest with the tip of his sword. Minji was thrown back. His glasses flew off, and he coughed up blood. He fell to his knees, leaning on his katana and holding his chest with his other hand. The commentator noticed that he was writhing in pain, and it looked like it was the end for him. The boy realized that he could not defeat him. It did not matter, because he was no match for him. He was depressed by the reproaches that he could not do anything, and was not as strong as Kim. He just wanted his sister to be proud of him. Without his glasses, he stood up with difficulty and grabbed the katana with both hands. The boy had to hit the enemy at least once, so he swung the katana and hoped to hit the enemy with at least its tip. The audience was delighted with the action, but the next moment Minji was already unconscious. The commentator announced the winner of the fight, a red-haired boy from the Transcendental Academy. He heard someone from the stand say that it was not surprising, because that poor guy was not even standing next to him. Such a monster definitely had no place in a tournament of this level. Bastard or not, he was definitely a master of his craft. The next moment, the crowd went even crazier, and there was blood on the big screen showing the winner's face. The red-haired man was surprised by the warmth spreading down his cheek. Blood was dripping from a small cut. The loser's punch had hit the target. Someone in the crowd asked if he liked to beat weaklings, and looking at his blood, they doubted his greatness. The red-haired man could not bear to hear someone mocking how such an elite was wounded, and he told the judge that he was withdrawing from the tournament. The judge did not understand what this meant, and the next moment the winner began to beat the already lying down loser. He was shouting that he was sick of their circus, and that because they accept just anyone, no one above the entry level would ever show up. The judge demanded that he stop, because the fight was over and they would have to take action. But the guy didn't care. He kept beating the unconscious guy, and they couldn't do anything to him, because the red-haired man had already stopped participating in the tournament. He argued that they themselves should be disgusted by these cockroaches, who were pathetically trying to become hunters. The red-haired man put his leg over the poor guy's head and said that cockroaches should know their place, and was about to strike, but the next moment he had to block the attack of the boy with the spear. Kim said he couldn't wait to see them in the finals, but he was tired of waiting, and would beat the bastard right now if he wanted to. The guy demanded that he remove his foot from his friend's head, but the red-haired man wasn't going to listen to his orders, so Kim just pushed him away with his weapon. He knelt down to the guy and tried to bring him to his senses. He could barely speak. At the same time, the red-haired man began to laugh at this touching scene. Kim said that something was wrong with him, since he liked to look down on everyone and mock them like that. But he was just unbearable that some hillbilly didn't know his place. Kim replied that they had the right to dream, even if they were weaker than him. But he just laughed at the boy's naivety and waited for him to tell him more tales of hard training and success. The crowd in the stands, meanwhile, did not understand why the organizers did nothing about the situation, and as it turned out, they were ordered not to interfere from above. The man in the cloak was happy to hear this, while Seo Joon was worried about her student. The red-haired man called the boy even dumber than he thought, and was going to explain how this world really works. Only the talented can achieve something, and even they need to go over the heads of others, so dreams are unnecessary and only for losers. Kim used to think so himself. He had put up with a lot of shit for 9 years to become a hunter, but reality kept reminding him of himself. He hated himself because of his lack of money, his lack of talent, and his inability to change anything. His job only helped him not to drown, but did not allow him to achieve anything more. His dream was not something that could be achieved through hard work, and it was pathetic. he often thought that everything could have turned out differently if he had chosen a different path. He had to constantly suffer from fear and self-doubt. Kim went to the judge and ordered him to take care of the wounded man. He stood up and thought that such thoughts make people despair. Kim rushed in and was about to kick the red-haired man's ass, but the judge shouted after him that it was against the rules and demanded he stop. The red-haired man was laughing, because the guy with the spear was probably trying to make a joke by raising his hand at him. Blocking the spear, he called the attacker a miserable cockroach, but Kim replied that he was a bug himself, dodging the counterattack. Now the red-haired man was attacking himself, and Kim could barely contain his blows and realized his strength. Now he understood why he was called the winner of the tournament, because in the battle with the giant in the helmet he had no doubt of his victory, but now everything was different. Kim tried not to think about it and act according to the lectures, letting go of the situation and going with the flow, trusting his feelings. The boy pushed off the swordsman's chest with the spearhead and increased the distance. The judge was still shouting at them to stop, but the red-haired man told him not to interfere. He considered himself a predator, and now he saw the same in his opponent's eyes, but he wasn't going to let such a trash dream. The swordsman rushed forward and was going to confront reality with his dreams, but Kim managed to block his powerful blow. It seemed to the attacker that the boy with the spear was getting stronger with each block of his blows, as if a monster was growing before his eyes. Kim was about to attack himself, putting the point of the spear in front of him, but only pushed the enemy away and they flew in different directions. The red-haired man couldn't believe that some bad guy was able to restrain his attacks, and the next moment his weapon was filled with red mana. The red-haired man had no intention of losing to him, and Kim realized that he could not do anything now, because he did not know how to control mana. Ju-hwan was shouting at him to stop, because he was going to kill his opponent. Kim realized that the best choice would be to run away, but he didn't want to do it, even though it was the right thing to do. He felt like he would be betraying everything he had learned and remembered his mentor's words. The king of the hegemon was once surrounded by enemies on all sides. Their shouts and battle songs were heard everywhere. One of his students once asked him why he rushed to attack, because the outcome of the battle was clear from the beginning. Although he had lost in advance, this could not be changed, and he was overwhelmed with despair. He was afraid of defeat the most, but he rushed into the battle because it was simply necessary. He told his student to fight no matter what. He needed to fight like a beast with faith in victory. The mentor fought then, but he realized that even if he could lift whole mountains, he would not be able to win forever, and he lost. But it was the true spirit of a warrior, and it was because of it that he became a hegemon king. He shouted that the power that can tear up whole mountains can erase any obstacles, and the warrior spirit can turn the whole world upside down and will rule over it. Kim's weapon was filled with blue light, and he rushed forward at the enemy. The red-haired man shouted that he was just his doormat, because he was the only real predator here. Men were already running to stop the duelists, but it was too late. The red-haired man shouted, ordering his opponent to die, and their weapons clashed. Whirlwinds of red and blue energy threw back the men who were about to stop them, and a cloud of dust enveloped the center of the arena. The dust dissipated, and two figures stood motionless in it. The next moment, the red-haired man slowly fell to the ground, unconscious, blood spurting from his mouth. The crowd screamed in surprise, and Kim, though exhausted, stood over his opponent with a spear point at his head. The stands began to shout the winner's name, and Seo Joon couldn't believe what she was seeing. After all, he hadn't been able to stop her mana attack 2 weeks ago, and now he was using aura himself. She spotted a cloaked figure behind her and recognized him. The one who had placed the giant bet was now screaming more than she was. The boy's hood was down, and he seemed even more surprised than the girl herself, as if Kim had broken some rules of the universe. As soon as the dark-haired girl thought about his bet on her student, he disappeared. Kim returned home broken, his face covered in band-aids, and he recalled the events again. The boy was disqualified, even though the organizers agreed with the illegal actions of the red-haired man, but he withdrew from the tournament. Unlike him, he was being loaded on a stretcher by medics, and although the magic reinforcement of the sword was recognized as an attempted murder, he will most likely face nothing but a ban on taking the exam for the next 5 years. The winner of the tournament was automatically the boy with the scar. The second-place winner was Minji, who was beaten to a pulp, and the last was the big guy with the axe. The latter muttered that he was just lucky, and the guy with the scar said that winning without a fight was a true victory. Kim could only be happy with his good progress. After the fight with the red-haired man, he managed to significantly improve his performance. His progress in the Hegemon King's lectures had passed the halfway mark, and perhaps that was why he had awakened that power. He considered enrolling in another course, because with his current progress, everything was much easier. Seo Joon caught up with him, and she asked him if he was okay, and he told her that he was not as weak as he looked. The girl breathed a sigh of relief, and the guy apologized, because if he hadn't rushed to fight that bastard, he would have won the tournament. She said that it was not important, and he had nothing to apologize for. She was just wondering if he was okay, even though he was counting on that prize. The guy was hurt. He completely forgot about the 100,000. He was desperate both because of Longin's spear, and because he needed the money to continue his course. Yoon asked him what he needed the money for, because in her eyes he looked like a mad dog who had heard about the tidy sum. Kim told her about the spear he really wanted, and even though it wasn't scary in the end, he felt a little sorry. But he would have been even more sorry if he hadn't stood up for the poor guy. Now they agreed that they would somehow find the money, and the next moment a boy with glasses was approaching them, calling out to Seo Jun's brother from afar. His face was covered in bandages, and his head was bandaged, and he barely caught up with his partner, who was about to leave. Seo Jun immediately tried not to show her face, and the boy stammered and asked if he could become as strong if he trained hard. Kim was surprised by this question, and had to answer that it would be difficult. He realized that the poor man had no talent to become a hunter, and although everyone said that hard work would allow you to achieve anything, this world was not like that. Kim told him that he shouldn't pursue the hunter's profession, and that he was still young enough to discover other skills, and shouldn't be upset about it. The boy agreed with him. He wasn't going to get depressed, and just wanted to thank him for everything and say a proper goodbye. Kim wasn't going to let him go so easily. He told him not to listen to anyone on the road to his dream, not even him. He would be constantly told that he had no talent and that he would only fail, but no one else's opinion should become his reality. The guy with the glasses turned around. He was crying at these words. Kim told him to just move forward no matter what, and promised to visit him and his sister sometime. When they finally said goodbye, Yoon said that she was pleasantly surprised by his words, but Kim thought that he was always sticking his nose in other people's business. She said there was nothing wrong with that, and was happy that he now had his first fan. But he replied that it would be better to have another student, not just a fan, and now Yoon realized that she had to seize the moment and invite the boy to the academy. Kim was already walking away, and the girl thought about their academy, which was no longer just on paper. She shouted after Kim that she would buy him a new spear because he had done a good job. He didn't understand why she was being so generous, but Yoon said that he should take it as a scholarship and added that he wouldn't be satisfied with a cheap purchase. They would go together to a store that her old man was very fond of and choose something. Meanwhile, the man confidently walked to the master's chambers and asked if he was there. Everyone seemed surprised by the appearance of the one-armed guest. He was told about the time for meditation and asked not to disturb the master. But the man demanded to be immediately informed of his arrival because the matter was too important. He did not listen to the objections and went inside, bowing, and introduced himself. It was Star Sword's right-hand man, Seo Moonchul. The gray-bearded man replied sharply that he had asked quite clearly not to be disturbed, and the guest lowered his eyes. The next moment, the meditating man was enveloped in an aura. He asked how the one-armed man dared to ignore his orders, and the guest felt incredible pressure and could barely stand. It was impossible to move, but he made an effort to inform the host about his participation in the Seo Joon Academy tournament. This attracted the old man's attention, and he waited for details, taking in the aura flows. At this time, the mentor and the student had just come to the store, and the girl offered him one spear after another. The boy didn't like any of them, and began to exhaust both her and the shopkeeper. Meanwhile, Right Hand told everything he knew and asked the old man for permission to solve the problem. The Star Sword objected. He wanted to get to know his granddaughter's student personally and see what he was worth. The next morning, the boy trained hard. He was doing his daily spear task and made 5,000 strokes. An outraged Seo Joon watched this strange action, and Kim finally noticed her and asked her why she was suddenly so angry. She told him that he was just imagining things, but that yesterday he had chosen his new weapon so carefully, and at the end of the day, he decided to keep his old one. Kim replied that he just didn't think he was worthy of such a gift, but she knew he was lying, and he was definitely not the type to turn it down. She looked at him again with a frown and knew it was something else. The girl saw right through him, and he realized that he just couldn't look at ordinary weapons after seeing the spear created by the students of the Transcendent Academy. He wanted to just ask for the money, but he found that doing so would increase the price of Longina's spear by the same amount. Easy money was not respected by the Academy, and now he was afraid to even think about anything to circumvent the system. Without waiting for an answer, Yoon indignantly reminded him that she had promised to pay for anything, that such a chance comes only once in a lifetime, but he remained silent. She decided to ask him about his mana-boosting technique, but he just stared at her in surprise. The girl continued, saying that without mana, he would not be able to use magic. But she had seen him break through the monster's defenses and deflect her blows, not to mention the last fight in the tournament arena. Yoon had never seen him practice this skill, but it seemed to her to be of a high level. Kim didn't know what to say because he didn't know any such techniques. Mana amplification allowed for more efficient use of mana, and there were many types of mana amplification. The effectiveness of the technique was determined by the lower and upper class, and hunters even patented their own skills. The boy couldn't think of anything better, and said that this was the reason why he wanted to get into an elite academy. He wondered if the girl was teaching Star Sword techniques, but the old man forbade her to. Kim immediately realized that this was not surprising, otherwise he would not have been the only student here. Yoon offered to teach him her own technique, and even though the boy didn't even know she had one, she said she had always wanted to teach. She asked why he was asking, and the boy, as usual, lied, although he thought she was completely untalented and was just hiding in the shadow of her old man. Kim realized that she was right, because in the battle with the red-haired man, he felt firsthand that without mana, the gap between them was too wide. He plunged back into his thoughts, and wanted to take some kind of mana course, since he now had time again. The girl didn't understand why he couldn't answer such a simple question again, and just walked away, wishing him good luck in his training. Kim came to his senses, and asked where she was going, but the girl said she had things to do. The boy jokingly did not believe that she could have any business, and the girl turned around and threatened him with her fist, and ordered him to lock the place if he left early. Kim said not to worry about it, and the next moment, he was thinking about the mana course again. He would need Minter's help. The kid had promised to come back as soon as he checked his profile, but he hadn't shown up yet. Leaving the building of her academy, Yoon was not in a good mood because she looked carefree, even though she hadn't really done anything lately. He was watching a new lecture given by Archmage Merlin. A man in a cap with a long gray beard and a magical staff explained that this world was subject to cause and effect. Mana was something that could break these relationships, changing the very laws of the universe. At the end of the course, the students were trained as S-class mentors, but Kim didn't understand much at first. Although the magician said that everything was simple, it seemed that his mind was leaving him, just like after listening to the Buddha's wisdom. When Merlin finished explaining, he said that it was time to start practicing, and that Kim's daily task would be to create 1,000 magic spheres. The boy was not happy about the new daily routine, but he had to try to master it somehow. He dropped the spear and folded his hands in front of him, enveloped in a blue aura. It seemed that sensing mana was not so difficult, and it was probably due to Chiron's lectures. Although Kim could feel the mana, it was not so easy, and he could not shape it. Merlin explained that you need to use mana to connect your mind with the universe. You need to project the product of your imagination onto reality, and, even if it is by deception, assure it that it should be so. The imaginary had to become a law of nature, and the best example of this was the manifestation of mana in the form of an aura. The magician demonstrated a sphere of blue light in his hand, and the next moment Kim's face was illuminated by his own blue light. He managed to form an irregularly shaped blob of energy that was ridiculously tiny. Although this sphere would not be recognized, it was his treasure at that moment. The boy hoped that over time, he would be able to do more, staring at the tiny glow in his palm. The next moment, someone called out to him loudly, and a gray-haired old man in a suit and blue tie stood at the door. Kim turned around in surprise and recognized the man. Star Sword had come to see his granddaughter's current only student at the academy in person. The old man noticed something strange in his hand, and despite the boy's dull appearance, it seemed to be a blob of mana that was not so easy to create. The man realized that he clearly had a talent, and his entry into this academy only meant that the boy just wanted to use him. Seo Joon. Star Sword asked who he was, and the boy introduced himself and was glad to meet him. He had seen the legend only on the internet before, and now he was even scared, because he did not expect a visit from someone like that. Kim guessed that he had come to see Seo Joon, but she had just left to do some business of her own, and they missed each other. The old man was outraged by such a simple address to his granddaughter, because it is customary to address only those close to you by name. The boy did not understand this from the expression on the man's face, and called her by name again, surprised that he had not come to see her. The gray-bearded man shouted why he was still standing, and the boy was bewildered to understand what he was talking about. Then the old man explained that his thirst for killing in the form of an invisible aura paralyzes anyone below S level. The man demanded an explanation of his motives. The boy wondered how this was possible. It looked like the skill of the unwavering heart was saving him now. Kim said he didn't understand the question, and the old man, holding his hand on his katana, said that with such a talent he could be accepted to any academy and came closer. Having come here, his intentions could not be pure, and for some reason, he was deliberately getting close to his granddaughter. The old man was enveloped in powerful streams of aura. His eyes glowed and evaporated it. The boy would cover himself with his hand, and the next moment, he would shout that they had misunderstood each other, and he did not have time to finish. The old man did not expect to get an answer so easily, and the next moment the boy was already dodging a lightning swing of the katana he had just sheathed. The whistle of the sword over his head carried away a clump of hair, and the boy realized how serious it was. Seo Joon was at her grandfather's house, and the maid told her that he was away on business, and did not say when he would return. She wanted to tell him about her student, and didn't understand what kind of business he could have. He was now slowly approaching the boy, who was lying on the ground after dodging a blow, and he demanded an immediate answer. Kim was not going to give up and grabbed the spear. Seo Joon couldn't just leave, so she agreed to the maid's advice to ask someone who might know about his affairs. Although she wanted to keep everything a secret for as long as she could, her participation in the tournament was definitely not out of the question, and she had to solve this problem right away. She was called by her right hand, who was happy to see her because they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The girl said that he was right on time, because she had come to see her grandfather and needed to talk to him immediately. He replied that he was on his way to her academy, and the girl immediately jumped up and ran. The maid was surprised at her haste, and the man, knowing the reason, just looked after her. She ran as fast as she could, and did not understand how she could have missed this moment. The girl knew for sure that the old man would visit sooner or later, and could not let them meet without her. The boy looked at the katana in surprise, but it was still in its sheath after the blow. He decided that the old man wasn't going to kill him after all, but was just testing him. The old man still demanded an answer to his question, so the boy approached him and gestured with his hand to stop. The boy did not understand what he wanted, but he definitely misunderstood. Before he could finish speaking, the star sword denied his words. The boy knew how to control his mana and moved well in battle, so he didn't see the mistake. The old man struck again and shouted that he dared to lie to his face without hesitation. Kim barely held back his spear attack and begged the old man to calm down, no matter what Seo Joon told him. Star Sword heard his grandson's name and shouted that he was a scoundrel, and the boy still didn't understand what could make him so angry. The old man said that he was going to talk calmly and weigh all the circumstances that brought the boy here, and again approached with loud footsteps. Kim thought that he was lying and wasn't going to discuss anything, but he didn't care and prepared to fight. It was impossible to assure him of anything, but it was clear from his katana that he was not going to kill him. The old man could have killed him as soon as he sensed the presence of a stranger. The star sword was above any star. It was the closest thing to an ideal for the boy. So Kim decided not to miss this chance, and his weapon glowed with streams of mana. The old man didn't understand how he dared. Now the boy was enveloped in the aura. He had seen many hunters in his life, but only one dared to look him in the eye fearlessly. It seemed that the boy with the spear was very strong, and his granddaughter's academy had nothing to do with it. The old man rushed to attack. Kim was able to deflect his blow by chance, but now he could neither see nor even feel her. The strength of the attacker was beyond comprehension. Even a simple punch was impossible to notice, and the boy was already wondering how much longer he could dodge. He chose the moment to attack himself, but the old man blocked it with one hand and threw the boy back. The man said that the attack was too predictable, and he just needed to answer honestly. Kim was flying to the ground. He couldn't let it end that easily, but tricks wouldn't help him either. As long as the old man didn't draw his katana, he still had a chance to end it all in one blow, but he didn't know how to approach it. Kim stood up, but the next moment, the opponent was already above him, about to strike. The boy did not expect such speed, and was surprised by the old man's appearance, and his sword again passed millimeters from the boy's face, who at the last moment ducked under the blow. Recalling Merlin's words about the need to assure the universe of the reality of his wish, he decided to seize the moment right now. And at that moment, he was not capable of more, but put all his strength into one swing of the spear, which glowed with mana. But the next moment, Kim fell to his knees, and the enemy was still on his feet, looking down at him. The old man said that the scoundrel had finally shown his true face, and the boy was wiping blood from his mouth. Hearing this, he started to shout that the old man had attacked him first, but now it hurt him to even speak, and he couldn't wait for Seo Joon to return. The grandfather's face twisted at what he heard. The name of his granddaughter seemed to enrage the whole dragon, and the man shouted that he would kill him himself. Kim lifted the spear with his last bit of strength and closed his eyes, realizing that he was definitely finished now. The next moment, the door opened and a girl was screaming in the passage. She demanded that they stop and asked what they were doing here. Yoon looked furiously at the old man. She was all wet from running here. The girl asked Seo Joon how he was, and he was already covered in bruises, although he said it was nothing serious. The old man asked how such a crybaby could call himself a man, to which Kim replied that beating the star sword itself would make both men and women cry. It would not be surprising for the guy to beat up anyone he wanted. The old man again exploded in anger, demanding that Kim repeat what he had said, and Kim hid behind the girl and asked if he would beat him again. The girl's surprised face meant that it was the first time she had ever heard such words from her old man, the star sword himself. But Kim continued to wag his tongue, peeking out from behind her shoulders. He wanted to know why he had just been beaten up, and even if he was a legend, he still couldn't do whatever he wanted. Yoon told the old man to stop, and she apologized to the boy for all this and promised to explain everything later. Kim didn't think it was her fault and asked her to ignore the small bruises, but the girl apologized again and bowed. She stood there looking guilty, but the old man felt nothing of the sort, standing behind her with his arms crossed and his head held high. Kim said that he should go to the medical center and leave them, and the girl again apologized and promised to pay for the treatment. After saying goodbye to the boy, Yun looked at her grandfather. She wanted to talk to him, but the next moment there was complete silence. She had decided to finally speak up, but now she couldn't get a word out. The old man told her to stay away from this suspicious guy, and the dark-haired girl tried to object, but he said she couldn't know. She was immediately enraged, clenched her fists, and remembered every time she had heard something like that. The old man had been telling her what to do all her life and never wanted to hear her opinion. Even after agreeing to a compromise in the form of the academy, the old man kept doing the same thing. Every time she found someone, they ended up on the ground from his interrogations and could not stand it for long. Yun understood both why her grandfather behaved this way and why people actually came here in the first place. Every time she was desperate, but she could not stop someone from leaving either. The old man ordered the boy to be expelled from the academy by tomorrow, or he would do it himself. Before he could speak, the girl objected, saying that Seo Joon was not what he thought. The old man was outraged that she dared to contradict him, but she wasn't going to change her mind this time. She wasn't going to let him go, and she didn't understand why she always had to listen to the old man. He looked at his granddaughter in surprise, and she shouted that not even a month had passed since he had been meddling in her business again, because the academy was still hers. Yun could not remember anything special between them, but when she looked at Kim, she felt something strange. She wanted to be with him longer than with the others. The old man tried to tell her that he was just using her, and that she shouldn't throw a tantrum, but she said that although she didn't know why, she was going to figure it out on her own. She did not want to live in the old man's shadow forever. Yun calmed down and froze, apologizing for her screaming, but this time she would do things her way. The granddaughter left the room, and the old man silently watched her go, unable to remember when she had ever raised her voice at anyone. In the middle of the city, a rift shone, a giant dragon emerged from the portal, and passers-by tried to run for their lives, begging for help. Master Star's sword was told of the terrible news about his son. The old man immediately understood what they were talking about, and his face was filled with sadness. He had lost his son, and little Seo Joon had no one left but him. He decided that he would teach his granddaughter how to defend herself. At that moment, the girl's childhood ended, the old man pulled her away, and she never saw the teddy rabbit she had just been playing with. The man just had to do it, and was quite strict with her all the time. But over the years, the girl did not like fencing, and he made her get up again and continue training. He said that at this rate she would never become an ordinary huntress, not to mention reach any level at all. And when she wanted to choose her own path as a teacher, the old man wouldn't hear of it, because that wasn't why he had been teaching her the art of swordplay all these years. As always, he demanded that she do as he said, and would not listen to anything. Although he kept her with him all the time, he realized that sooner or later she would turn against him, but he did not want to think about it. The man still stood in the middle of her academy and thought about how it all ended, because the girl still rebelled. The next day, Kim was walking down the street in a hurry, stretching his shoulder, which was still sore from the recent fight, but he had recovered. He thought he was well enough to have another conversation with the old man, but remembering the latter's anger, he also recalled his dying thoughts. Though the star sword had definitely held back, if the dark-haired one had come a minute later, there would have been nothing left of it. The girl called him in the evening and told him about her relationship with the old man and what always happened to her students. It was clear that she hadn't told him everything, but it was clear how she felt and why Star's sword was so wary of him. Although his motives were clear, the boy could not agree with his actions. The boy stood in front of the academy door and wondered if he would ever apologize to him, but it was clearly impossible. Although Kim had made good progress in his studies, after being beaten by the legend himself, he did not want to repeat this experience. He opened the door, letting go of these thoughts, and finally thinking that progress was possible and worth the suffering. The boy immediately froze when he heard the greeting from the doorway, a harsh voice saying that he had finally arrived. Star Sword sat on the floor in a lotus position and asked why he was standing like a pillar. He demanded to come in and sit across from him, but the surprised boy was expecting another fight. The old man told him about the contract with his granddaughter, but after finally hearing the boy's version, he still suspected him. He said that he should stop looking at him like that, because he really had nothing to hide. It looked like the boy was telling the truth, but when the old man looked at him, he saw a good talent and a lot of energy for a simple student. And in fact, seeing his anger, Kim was not only not afraid, but even more determined to stand on his feet. While the old man was scratching his beard in thought, the boy asked if he could finally leave. When asked where he was going, Kim answered that he was going to train, and the man thought it was a good opportunity to see what he was hiding. But the next moment, Star Sword didn't understand what was happening and thought the boy was out of his mind. He just sat on the floor and stared at the dark screen of his phone, which had nothing on it. The old man asked him if he was meditating, because how else could he explain it? But the boy didn't even hear him the first time. He was thinking about his appearance and replied that to some extent it was. The old man said that although meditation was a good workout, it was not worth abusing it. The main thing was to understand that it strengthened his mind and spirit, not his body. Kim mumbled something in response and just kept hunched over his phone. This behavior was strange to the old man, because his science should have been of some interest to him. He decided to say that he would teach the boy something, and this did get his attention. Kim was surprised to ask if the Star Sword himself would really teach him, and the old man was pleased with himself, although he said this because his pride was hurt by such indifference. The next moment, the man's pride was bursting at the seams, because while he thought he was just going to show him a few techniques, the boy had already refused and said he was fine with everything. On the contrary, he asked the legend not to distract him, and when he had collected his thoughts, they could talk later. The next moment, Seo Joon opened the door and greeted the boy and was about to talk about yesterday. But she also froze in the doorway when she saw her old man standing next to the boy. He said she was just in time, and the girl asked him what he was doing here and demanded that he not lay a finger on anyone. The old man approached his angry granddaughter and whispered that the boy was definitely not healthy, because he refused to learn the Star Sword. The girl herself was surprised by this, and the old man continued, showing the boy's current condition as he stared at the phone like a zombie. But it didn't surprise Yun anymore, because he had always been like that, even though she understood the old man. She thought so herself at first, and went to say hello to the boy. He looked around in surprise, and asked how long the girl had been here, and she wanted to know how he was feeling. Star Sword watched this scene, and still did not like the boy. He wasn't particularly bright, but Yun was so smiling around him. He couldn't believe that she actually liked talking to him. Now the old man couldn't remember the last time she smiled like that. Watching them chatting and laughing, the old man couldn't let someone like that pick on his girl. The next moment, the right hand flew through the door, needing to immediately deliver important news to the master. He had been summoned by the Order of Truth, but the man believed that those weirdos should come to him when they needed something from him. But the Star Sword wanted to see Kaylee's successor, which had already attracted the old man's attention. In addition, the right hand informed him of another request, that he should bring a man named Kim Seo Joon. The young man finally turned his head from his phone in surprise, and asked if he was the one who had just been mentioned. The old man didn't understand why, and the next moment he exploded in anger because he decided that the boy was actually one of them. The girl was also surprised by this possibility, and recalled a strange figure in a cloak at the tournament, and it seemed that it was all somehow connected. But the boy claimed that he would like to know what was going on. It all seemed strange to the old man, because Kaliu himself should not be interested in some simple boy. Yun asked if the boy knew him personally, but he had no idea, and this was the first time he had heard of him. He was generally too lazy to go anywhere, and asked if he was really needed there. The dark-haired woman shouted that he was summoned by the Order of Truth itself, which included 7 apostles who were on a par with the leaders of the largest countries. It was a stupid question whether he should go, because Kalia was the successor of one of the apostles, and he probably never made personal appointments. Kim said he didn't care, and would rather train than talk to some foreign stranger. The right hand had an answer for this case, because Kalia had predicted the boy's refusal and offered 100,000 if he showed up. Kim immediately wondered how he could know he needed such an exact amount. The Order of Truth was a religious organization, but it served truth, not human gods. The mysterious man in the hoodie watching the tournament was the Great Voice. At the top of the order stood 7 apostles, each of them responsible for humility, diligence, chastity, abstinence, gratitude, charity, and patience. They transmitted the will of God, the only truth. A century ago, their organization was considered an ordinary cult, but when the rift occurred, they united with the heroes and made a significant contribution to the onset of peaceful times. After that, their ranks grew rapidly, as did their power. In addition, they defeated the Berserker, a giant monster that even all the heroes could not handle at once. He appeared out of nowhere when everyone thought that peaceful times had come. His appearance was considered a rift-level disaster, and only the Great Voice and the 7 apostles could resist the monster. Thanks to their efforts, new peaceful times have come. Now, on the outskirts of the city, Star Sword and a boy stood outside one of the nondescript hotels. He thought that this was somehow too cheap a place for representatives of an organization of this level. They were met by a man in a hoodie, and the old man introduced himself and was about to explain who was with him. But the man already knew who he was and asked him to follow him because Kalia was already waiting for them. The boy wondered if it was a mere coincidence that one of them was at the tournament, and now he was offered the exact same amount of reward. But the main mystery was why he was watching him at all and, moreover, called him for a personal meeting. Kim was worried that the man might know something about him and the transmissible acquired disease itself, and he needed to find out. The man in the hoodie led the guests through another door and asked them to wait in the waiting area. Kalia would join them soon. Sitting down on the couch, the old man said that it could not be otherwise. No one would wait for them. Kim asked if they knew each other, and Star Sword replied that it would be their first meeting, which surprised the boy. The boy thought they must be quite close, but the man said that although he had invited him several times, they had never met in person. The old man had known the Apostle of Chastity during the Great Schism, but not his successor. The boy remembered that he was still looking at the Great Star Sword, one of the heroes who saved the world, but he saw him more as just an ancestor of Seo Joon. Kim asked about the Great Voice, but the old man said that he had only heard about his only appearance during the battle with the Berserker, and it turned out that he had never met him and had only seen a figure in a cloak from afar. The next moment, the door opened and a girl greeted the guests, asking the old man if this was the first time they had met in person. Star Sword replied only that she had kept them waiting, despite the fact that she had called them. In front of them stood a blonde girl with a small braid but big blue eyes. She was wearing steel shoulder pads and breast armor with the emblem of the order, and a long blue cloak on her back. The apostle's successor needed time to purify his body and mind so that he could carry the word of God. It was the first time the old man had heard such nonsense, and the minister bowed and apologized for the late acquaintance and introduced herself to the boy. Kim wanted to introduce himself in return, but they already knew his name and thanked him for coming. The boy was curious about how they knew about him, and Kalia decided to clear up any misunderstandings before moving on to the main point. She told him about one of their followers who had watched the tournament and had praised the boy's skills so much that they had to meet. Kim was even disappointed by such a simple answer and could not believe that this could be the reason for a meeting of this level. Then the blonde girl suggested that they move on to the main topic of their meeting and told him about dungeon exploration. She hoped for Star Sword's cooperation, and although he was not happy, He had to realize that this was only the beginning. In one of the dungeons, a curvature of space was noticed, which the old man probably already knew. He wanted to say that there was nothing unusual about it, and not to talk nonsense, but Kalia interrupted him, saying that it was the decision of the order, and they needed to check the place. The old man thought about it, and said that she had flown to another country just to consolidate her power, and the girl replied that the great hero was not so easily misled. He realized that this was not the decision of the entire Order of Truth, because that would be ridiculous. Despite the revelation, the girl asked if he could help her, but the old man was interested in what she would offer him in return. The blonde saw that he wasn't going to do her a favor for nothing, but the Star Sword himself had everything going for him, and she had heard about his granddaughter's academy and wanted to offer something. The man did not listen, and when he heard his granddaughter's name, he immediately exploded in anger. The next moment, Kim's body went numb, and he realized the old man's true power. The Star Sword hatefully demanded that he not even try to involve Seo Joon in this matter, otherwise the blonde would not leave here alive. The servant of the order only coldly apologized for her mistake, but despite this, she had nothing to offer a hunter of this level. She offered to fulfill any of his requests in exchange for completing her task. The old man was not born yesterday, and did not believe her words, because tomorrow she could say that there was no agreement. The blonde offered to take an oath in the name of the Order of Truth, and the old man asked if she really believed that this would be enough to qualify her for the position of apostle. It didn't matter what he thought, she couldn't break the oath. The old man agreed to help her on the promise in the name of truth, and they held out their hands to each other for the right of the order. They closed their eyes, and were enveloped in a blue glow for a while. The next moment, the blonde woman turned to the boy and told him that their order would like to sponsor him. Kim did not understand what she meant, because he already had an academy. But the girl explained that they would be able to sponsor any of his activities that the academy could not cover. The boy wanted to know what they wanted from him in return, but the blonde girl smiled and said that just being close to the order would be enough. If he refused, they would do nothing, but the boy realized that this could not be, and they would somehow get him to pay for their services. Kim said that he was not interested in such an offer for now, but he would think about it after answering only one of his questions. For a second, he thought that the girl might lie or somehow evade the answer, but there might not be another chance. He couldn't ask her directly, so he handed her the phone and asked her what she saw on the screen. She was in no hurry to answer, as the Buddha was talking about the essence of the soul, which was what defined a person, not their body. Even after the death of the latter and reincarnation, the essence should remain the same. Kim asked her again what she saw, and the girl noted the strangeness of such a question, although he did not find it difficult. The blonde answered that it was too complicated for her, and the boy took the phone away, adding that in that case he was not interested in her offer. The next moment, Kalia casually mentioned the black screen and wanted to know if he would be satisfied with that answer. Since he had received an answer to his question, the girl asked him to reconsider his response to their cooperation. Kim did not hesitate for a moment and refused to be sponsored by the order. In the evening, Kalia was watching the city from her window when one of her followers joined her. She asked him how it went and what he had learned, and Kelkos replied that he hadn't noticed any distortions in space. He was sure of it and swore by the name of the Order of Truth, because the girl could not believe it. The blonde girl herself didn't see anything significant in Kim Seo Joon, and even if he was special, he was just a student with a strange question that cornered her. There was a strange feeling in her chest, but now she had to meet with another apostle. She told Kelkos to just continue his observation for now, and told him that the curvature of the dungeon space was a priority. The girl wanted to know about the other heroes, and the guy in the hoodie said that he had called everyone except the Darkness Sword and the Soul Blade, and no one had seen them for a long time. Meanwhile, Star Sword and Kim were returning to the city, and the old man asked why he had refused the offer. The boy said that it was all too suspicious. He reasoned that although he didn't know anything about the order itself, it didn't seem like Kalia herself was connected to the Transcendent Academy. He said that he just didn't want to have anything to do with any suspicious people. The old man asked why he was not concerned about his granddaughter's education at the academy. Kim said that it was unlikely that there was another person in the world as honest as Seo Joon. He asked the old man what the concept of a dungeon warp meant, and he replied that the magic in that place was warped. Because of this, the difficulty of that level was very different from the previously set level, and such distortions usually lead to this. And another side effect was that such dungeons manifested in their reality earlier than expected. The boy was surprised that this was possible, and the Star Sword replied that this was not really possible now. But in the times of the rift, such things happened all the time, and the boy had already asked about the truth of Kalia's words. The old man told him not to worry about it, because the cataclysm had long since ended. The next moment, he walked in the other direction from the academy, and when the boy asked, he said that it was not worth knowing. The old man stopped for a second and reminded the boy that if he did anything to his Seo Joon, he would be dead. Kim happily asked if he had finally recognized him, but the old man sternly replied that he would keep an eye on him. The boy said that it was probably because the girl was moving away from him, and the old man was already clenching his fists in rage. Seeing that he was losing his patience, Kim said goodbye without finishing and began to retreat. Even though he was right, the old man immediately turns to his fists when he disagrees with someone, so he needs to become stronger. Kim returned to the academy, and the girl asked where her grandfather was, because they must have returned together. The dark-haired girl wanted to know if he had said anything to him, and apologized for the old man's difficult temper. She was sorry for the incident, and should have warned the student earlier. The boy replied that even though he expressed his thoughts incorrectly, he understood him, and he liked the fact that he would receive only a few strokes for any offense. But the next moment, he didn't understand what he was saying, and the girl was just thanking him for everything. For a while, they both froze in embarrassment. The girl remembered that he needed money, and the boy asked how she knew. Yoon said that he had been shouting about it every day since they first met. Most of all, when he was wearing those kobolds in the dungeon, and when he was left without a reward because he was disqualified from the tournament. Kim reflected that money was really his biggest problem, because even the 100,000 for his visit to Kalia, he had to pay off his debts and compensate that red-haired jerk. And he didn't have the money to continue the course, let alone pay for private lessons or buy that lawn for spear. Yoon said that while he was away, she had found the perfect activity for him. She showed him the announcement of the 24th dungeon clearing competition and the rules for participation, and he began to look at it with interest. The first thing Kim noticed was the 222,000 reward, which was open to students of government-recognized academies. He didn't really understand how it worked, and the girl explained that it would be a kind of competition to clean up dungeons that no one goes to. Most likely, the raid was to be conducted on unprofitable dungeons. During the Great Rift, hunters felt a sense of duty and responsibility. They were driven by their faith in humanity, and each dungeon was cleared until it was completely safe. Nowadays, professional hunters are only interested in profit, and therefore dungeons began to appear that no one clears because of their low rating and disproportionate difficulty. If you don't clear a dungeon in time, the rift will bring its monsters to the human world, and regardless of their level, they will still be dangerous. Even small fairies can cause a lot of noise among ordinary people, and cause a lot of damage. Initially, government hunters went down into such dungeons, but sending people of such a high level proved to be too inefficient, as they only encountered low-ranking goblins who were knee-deep in the dungeons. Yoon explained that the government had solved this problem in a different way, and Kim picked up on the idea and realized that they had decided to organize competitive raids. The dungeons were of a level that a student of any hunter academy could handle. It was both a great practice and promoted their academies in the overall ranking. Kim agreed that the person who came up with this was a genius. The girl said that he should easily win there, and he was already thinking about winning and a great opportunity to increase his progress in his studies. The boy happily agreed to participate, and Yoon said she would apply right away. Kim saw the award and saw no reason to refuse, although at the same time he realized that the mentor was just looking for a way to raise their academy's ranking and accidentally came across this announcement. He remembered his previous experience with those monster humans who were ready to devour their opponents and now realized that it would not be that easy. Yoon was praising him for his excellent work today, even though she had no idea what he had been doing all this time. Kim was already mentally promising to get his future treasure. He wondered how exactly this type of competition works. It would last for a whole week, and there would be many dungeons marked on the map that could be booked for clearing. You will be given 10 hours to clear one location, after which the reservation will be cancelled and reaccess to this place will be closed. The winner is the one who clears the most dungeons the fastest. The boy realized that speed was the key here, but it was also difficult because of the monster corpses that needed to be handled. Yoon didn't understand what he was talking about, saying that they wouldn't get much for the corpses and that they shouldn't think about it. But remembering their first trip and how Kim had handled the carcasses on his own, she shouted, asking if he was going to do the same during the raid. The boy thought it was part of the rules of the raid, but the girl didn't fall for it and tried to get it into his head that winning was more important, even though he couldn't just leave the precious corpses to someone else. No matter what Yoon said, Kim couldn't stop thinking about it, wishing there were different rules, but he found that he couldn't see them. He had an idea and started looking for the rules. On the day of the competition, he checked his progress. Even though some of the courses were progressing while he was working, Chiron and Merlin's lectures were somehow not reaching a round number. He always noticed a change every 10% of the way through, but these two courses were not reaching the next mark. Yoon asked him if he had received the tournament application, but he had prepared it yesterday. She looked around and asked where his assistant was, as if he hadn't found his way here. But Kim denied it, because if there was a wayfinding skill, even the star sword itself would not be able to compete with the Joshi. He finally found them, and Kim called him over. His partner wondered why he was shouting so much, and the boy was already thinking that he would be late, even though he had warned him what would happen in this case. Now the partner asked what exactly he should do. A few days earlier, Kim had offered to work on the same team on the phone. He told him about the tournament, and would like him to be his driver and handle the carcasses. The guy promised to pay after the raid and promised to carry the carcasses himself, but he couldn't do the rest because of time constraints. Even if those monsters would not be worth much, they would still be able to make good money because of the large number. His partner said he could do more if it was a matter of speed, so if he was just trying to make his job easier, he would do it. Kim knew that carcass processing required certain skills, and he could only rely on a Josei in this matter, so he offered the job to him. The raid began and Yoon wished them luck. The partners headed for the truck and Kim asked if he had memorized the rules. A Josei told him not to worry about it, and that he could rely on him. The boy fastened his seat belt and emphasized the speed of the exercise. He reminded us of two conditions. The one who cleared the most locations would win, and at the same time it was important to get to them quickly. The dungeons were only 1 to 2 levels, and the boy was fully confident in his abilities, although the passage of each location would differ in time. Kim handed his partner the phone and demanded to get to the first location as soon as possible. Ajasi looked at the markings and listened to him say that he would do a better job than the navigator, and was surprised by this statement. He laughed and didn't mind, and the truck took off. Inspector Go So Jun was yawning lazily near the first fault. She was checking the records and noting the entry of the first participant with the name Kim So Jun. She couldn't remember the name of the academy and decided that since he was from some obscure institution, he would be able to complete the exam in about an hour. At first, she thought that he was going to cheat by coming with someone else, but his partner was still outside, and it did not violate the conditions of participation. The girl looked at the man as he slowly sipped his coffee, and thought he was just another driver. The next moment, she stood up cautiously because the fault suddenly began to wobble. The head of a young man appeared, demanding that his partner get ready immediately because he was done. Ajosi said that he didn't even have time to question him, as he was already done. The inspector demanded that he stop, because the rules forbade outsiders to interfere. But the guy was aware of this, and said that his current raid was already over, which surprised the girl. She went in to see for herself and screamed that it couldn't be. The bodies of goblins were lying in the cave, and while she was looking around and couldn't believe that he had done it in just 10 minutes, the boy was hurrying to collect the corpses. She didn't understand what he was doing, and he told her to just ignore him. He looked crazy because he was counting his squats on the way. His partner saw this, and was also surprised that he was still doing it. Kim said that no matter what, he could not miss a task, and had additional tasks in addition to the main ones. Ajosi was unwrapping his tool bag, and the boy was interested in how long it would take him to finish. The carcasses were low level, and there were few valuable parts, so the man promised to handle one corpse in 15 seconds. The guy praised his partner's speed, it was what he was counting on, and suggested that they both start right away. The girl was surprised to hear that they were really going to dismember the corpses here, but the guy didn't see a problem with it, and she couldn't object. The guy with the spear continued to crouch with the dead goblins on his shoulders, and his partner was cutting up their bodies with great speed. The inspector watched in horror as the two men splashed fresh blood and packed the trophies into bags and began to run away. The guy asked his navigator where they should go now, and when he heard that the next location was not so close, he suggested rushing there right away. The girl stood there stunned, not realizing what she had just seen. The boys jumped into the car, slamming the door, and Ajosi said that it was even fun. The boy was happy that they had managed to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and was laughing too. It was a beautiful sunny day, and a butterfly landed on the hand of one of the inspectors, who was basking in the sun in his chair. It was nice for him to relax in this way after a long day at the computer. He wanted to stay here forever, and asked the butterfly if he thought the same way. The man couldn't wait for at least one participant, but the next moment the butterfly flew off his finger because a truck almost turned over. Without another word, 2 people jumped out and ran toward the portal. Kim immediately jumped inside and began to smash the skeletons, their bones flying in all directions, and he kept bringing his partner a new batch to process. The inspector watched the man smashing bones at the table in amazement, and was delighted to see the large amount of bone marrow. At the same time, some weirdo was crouching with skeletons on his shoulders on the way to them, counting the times. Without saying a word to him, they gathered themselves and immediately ran to the car. A butterfly landed on the inspector's head, who didn't understand. In the evening, the office workers were calculating the results of today's dungeon hikes. It was the dungeon management team of the Ministry of Government Security. The manager asked one of his subordinates if he had completed the report, but the man replied that the parka was already on his desk. He sat down in his chair and began to read the results. He looked at the photo of a participant named Lee So-young, who represented the Vostok Academy, and with 16 clear dungeons could already claim victory. But when he looked down, he saw that she was only in second place among the next participants, who managed to clear 14 or 12 locations. He started flipping through the folder to see who had made 17 raids, and on one of the pages, Kim Seo Joon was in first place, with the number 32 opposite him. He called his subordinate to him and demanded that he check whether he had made a mistake in his calculations. It was impossible to clear so many locations even in a whole day, but the subordinate said that he didn't believe it at first either and asked all the inspectors. They told him that the participant spent no more than 10 minutes on a raid and moved very quickly between locations, not losing a single second. The boss could not believe it, because even though these dungeons were only 1 to 2 levels, it took at least half an hour for everyone else, not including the time for travel and rest. He asked if he was a student, and if no one was helping him, the whole office was on its ears, and the subordinate said that he had not found any violations during the inspection. The boss couldn't just let it go and had to know if he was somehow deceiving them, so he started looking for the academy he was from. At first, the name of the Manhwa Academy didn't tell him anything, but the next moment he remembered that it was founded by the granddaughter of the Star Sword himself. The subordinate then remembered where he had heard the name. The boss decided to check whether the Star Sword himself was involved in the raids, and the subordinate began to check it out. Meanwhile, the girl who had taken second place on the first day apologized after hearing this information. The man in front of the computer said that she would not be satisfied with a simple apology, because if their academy did not take first place, they would be in big trouble. A dark-haired girl in a white shirt and tie promised to do everything possible to win. The man said that her competitor had already completed 32 dungeons, and he didn't believe that one person could do that. Even if he spent 10 minutes on each of them, it was impossible given the distance between the locations. But he immediately changed his mind, taking into account that someone must have helped him in some way. The man stood up and went to the window, demanding that the girl continue in the same spirit, and promised to take care of the rest himself. She thought that from his tone of voice, he was up to no good. He turned to her and understood her thoughts. Seo Man was a former A-level hunter and the current director of the Vostok Academy. He told his daughter not to think about it, because it was more important to survive in a world where the cunningest wins. The father said that it didn't matter who was right if they didn't win. The girl stood silently, and the man asked her if she was worried about the other participant. Her father hoped she wouldn't be as stupid as Jin Soo, and her daughter promised not to let him down. She recalled the words of the boy who said that as a professional hunter, she had to have something left for which she could not compromise. She didn't understand what he was talking about at the time, because she herself believed that only money decided everything now. He laughed at the girl's words and said that once money consumed her heart, the world would never be the same. The boy was going to become a hunter who would make people's hearts flutter. Seo Jun begged him not to let anyone else hear this, otherwise she would be ashamed of him. He laughed and did not believe that she was ever ashamed that she denied it. But now his image in front of her eyes was only annoying, and she got angry and ordered the guy to leave her alone, since he was dead. Meanwhile, the partners were resting in the park after a long day. Kim was handing his friend a can of drink and praising him for his good work, while he sat on a bench and said that if he kept doing this all week, he would probably die. The guy laughed, because it turned out that his partner also liked to pretend. Ajasi was angry because he didn't seem to realize that driving a car while making up a route on the go was not easy. Kim agreed with him, but asked if the money didn't make him tired. His partner asked how much money they had earned, and the guy took out his phone and counted, saying that it was almost 6,000. And even if we split it in half, it would be good money. Ajasi objected, saying that he would be satisfied with 30% for his work because he was just his driver. The boy assured him that his contribution meant much more to him, but the man didn't want to hear it because he had originally expected 20%. The man demanded to do as he said, otherwise he would not come to the raid tomorrow. Kim could do nothing and suggested rounding 1,800 to 2,000 because it was an ugly number. His partner didn't understand why it was an ugly number, and the guy begged him to just take what he was given, because without him, they wouldn't have been able to earn so much. Ajasi agreed and continued to drink, and the boy asked him if he was surprised. His partner did not understand what he meant, because he could not be surprised by money. Kim was referring to the speed of the raids, but then his partner remembered that he had already seen him in action at a tournament. It was a surprise for the guy. He didn't know that he was there, and didn't understand why he didn't even call then. But the man was as usual in his spirit. Ajasi did not want to disturb the boy. Uncle Manchul had always been kind to him, and had always lent a shoulder after the loss of his parents. Kim asked if he was going to open a transportation company, because it would be nice to finally have his own business. But his partner replied that he had nowhere to get the money for that, and wondered if the boy could start his own business already. But Kim replied that he couldn't yet, but he was thinking about it at some point in the future. His partner asked him not to bother him until then. The guy also laughed at this and thanked him for everything. The next day, the partners were working on the kobolds and heard the inspector call them the same dungeon slayers. Kim asked again, and Ajasi didn't understand what he was talking about. But the man explained that they were now called that because they were cutting up monster carcasses right in the middle of the street in addition to raiding. He didn't believe in these rumors himself until he saw everything with his own eyes. He just made sure they weren't breaking anything and asked them not to pay attention to him. Now the total score showed 73 dungeons for Kim Seo Joon and 36 for Lee So Young, while the other participants were far behind the favorites. Kim read the results on his phone and said that at this rate, victory would be in their pocket, but his breathless partner said it would be strange if it didn't happen. The guy was glad to have him as a backup and told him to be cheerful because there were only 5 days left. Ajasi said he probably wouldn't get a break even if he died. But Kim promised to treat him to something tasty as soon as they won. But his partner asked when he would be able to afford good food because he didn't look like a rich man now. But the boy promised to buy him anything he wanted and told him to bring Seo Young with him because he hadn't seen her for a long time. Ajasi put his arms around the boy's neck and joked that he would have to buy a whole cow. When he said that they were doing well, he added that maybe 1 cow would not be enough. The guy had a good feeling about it, but the next day his partner was looking at the map and sighing. Kim asked what happened, and looking at the map he saw that all the nearest locations were booked. Moreover, there was not a single free dungeon left for them. Only the far distance, an hour away, was free, and looking at the map, the partner suspected that it was no coincidence, although Kim said they couldn't know for sure. But after clearing the distant location, the same thing happened, so that at the end of the day they were able to complete only 10 tasks, while their closest rival earned almost 3 times as many points, surpassing their yesterday's result. Now the boy agreed that something strange was going on, and the 3 of them were discussing the situation, and Ajashi was sure that the girl who was catching up with them was involved. Yoon said that in the past it was possible to find out who had booked specific dungeons, but this time it was impossible, and she was going to find out from the organizers. Kim was thinking that even though they were in first place now, there were still 4 more days to go, and they would lose at this rate. He apologized to his partner, because now the processing of the bodies was taking a back seat, but he understood and said that the main thing was to win. But the man rightly said that even if he stopped doing this, the increased distance between locations would still eat up all his time, even when he tried to plan the route more accurately. He came up with a plan and started explaining it to his partners. The next day, a whole crowd of students were waiting in the park with their phones ready, and Lee So Man, the head of Vostok Academy, himself, was telling everyone to be on the lookout. He reminded them that as soon as a guy named Kim Seo Yoon booked something, they should immediately take the nearest locations for themselves. Some guy muttered under his breath that he was worrying too much, because they were already monitoring the situation. Someone asked him how he would carry out the raids, and he replied that he didn't care if they paid him for it. While they were talking, the chairman waited for the phone to ring, and the next moment, he was standing on the bench and urging everyone to act, because the guy had finally fulfilled the reservation. Like yesterday, they started booking everything around the boy, but to avoid making it seem too suspicious, they did it at short intervals. But the next moment, everyone stopped and didn't know what to do. The chairman asked what the hell had happened, and one of the students revealed that the guy had booked a seat next to their Lee So Young and added that if they started booking her, it would affect her as well. He was surprised and demanded to cancel the reservation, but they reminded him that according to the rules, this could not be done within 10 hours, and they had not gone to those raids yesterday for nothing. At this time, a girl in a tie was chopping slime in one of the dungeon caves. She quickly finished and jumped into the car with the driver and demanded to move to the next target. He was surprised, because not even 15 minutes had passed, but the next moment he was looking at his phone in bewilderment. The girl asked him why he was not leaving, and he was horrified to hear that everything around him was already taken, which surprised her as well. Kim watched the results and was glad that his guess worked. The 2 favorites were tied on today's points, and although the guy initially thought it was a simple coincidence, it didn't look like that now. Even though he was forced to lose such a great opportunity to earn money, they will go down together, but at least their gap will be stable for now. At the end of the day, Seo Young questioned her father about whether he was responsible. He knew that she would notice sooner or later, but he did not expect such a reaction. He demanded that she just continue with her work, and he already had another plan, so he would take care of everything. On the 5th day of the competition, the two portals were close to each other, and Ajashi looked at the girl with the sword and immediately recognized his opponent. At first, Kim did not understand what he was talking about, but the man was sure that it was Lee So Young. An inspector ran up to the trio and reminded them that quarrels between participants were prohibited and punishable by disqualification. Kim said that there was nothing of the sort between them, just that the portals to the dungeon were a few meters apart. The rivals finally met each other in person. The guy said that no matter who won, everything had to be fair, because the competition started with good intentions. The girl didn't understand what he meant, because his words implied that she was not playing fair. Kim smiled and said he didn't mean anything by it, and walked away. Seo Yin watched him go and mentally scoffed at his words about sincere intentions, the first time she had heard such nonsense in these competitions. Such a notion didn't work in their world, because everything was built on selfishness, and all actions were based on self-interest in one way or another. Some people helped others as long as it was profitable for them, and then just left them to their fate. The girl entered her dungeon, thinking that there was no place for sincerity in this life. She took out her sword and was going to quickly deal with the attacking goblins. Having quickly dealt with them, Seo Young came out of the portal and listened to the inspector's surprise. He didn't believe the rumors, but when he saw everything with his own eyes, he was genuinely surprised. But the next moment she realized that he was not talking about her, because next to her she saw a wild scene of monsters being slaughtered and her opponent counting sit-ups with a couple of corpses on his shoulders. As she stood there stunned, the boy noticed her speed. He hadn't expected her to be so skilled. He pointed to her dungeon and asked for permission to take the corpses from there, so that they would not be wasted. The girl did not understand what he wanted at first, but eventually allowed him to do what he wanted. Kim thanked him as he walked, and a second later, he was carrying out the bodies of her goblins, counting the squats right in front of her. Seo Young couldn't help but ask him what he was doing, and he said it was exercise, but if she meant the corpses, it was a good income. She said it was a waste of time and walked away. The girl was only convinced that there were no good intentions, and that there were no hunters with such intentions. She recalled the words of her dead brother, who had planned to become a professional hunter and become a voice in people's hearts, but the times had come when everyone could become a hunter, and it had become commonplace. Meanwhile, Star Sword finished his sword strike and asked Kalia about the level of the dungeon. Standing on a giant dragon, he said that this monster was as high as level 10, while the girl assured him that the underground caves were level 6. She thought about it and said that this must be a result of a distortion, because the skin showed that this location was level 6, which is why this giant was here. The old man didn't believe in this nonsense, because it didn't work that way. He would rather believe it was the work of the order itself, just like 30 years ago. The blonde swore on the honor of the whole order, but the man said they were all a little crazy. The girl in the magic hat demanded that they not make a scene and not even think about starting a fight in front of her. She appeared out of nowhere, her brown hair flowing from the dissipating mana, and she held her hat against the gust of magic. The girl's name was Zhang Chi-min, and she was a disciple of the Star Demon. The old man shouted at her, asking why she was here and where her mentor was. But she said that he knew about his health condition, and that he was the only old man here who was spared by old age. He asked what old man she was talking about, as he was a pain in the ass. The girl joked back that his manners hadn't changed at all with age. Now the three of them stood in front of the monster's carcass and felt an abnormal flow of mana, but it didn't look like a normal warp. The girl in the hat asked if anything strange had happened to the old man in that dungeon, and he said it was just another hole, only with a 10th level monster. Star Sword said that he hadn't completely ruled out the possibility of a warp effect, and the girl added that, as hard as it was to admit, everything pointed to it. This hadn't happened since the Berserker had appeared, and Blonde was worried about what would happen if the same thing happened in the other dungeons. The brown-haired woman thought about it, even though the chance was too small, but she said they couldn't ignore it. They needed to gather more information, and she was going to ask the head of the association to check all the low-level dungeons. The inspector was looking at the dungeon portals in amazement as she and her partner stood in front of 3 glowing balls of energy in the middle of the city. He said that although such close proximity was extremely rare, he had seen 2 portals merge before. But it was the first time he had seen 3 at once. The next day, a student appeared at each of the locations, coming out of the dungeon Kim had booked earlier. All of them apologized for getting the location wrong and just walked away. It looked like someone was trying to interfere again, and had found a new way to do it that worked. It was unclear where the on-site inspectors were looking, and Josie was furious, but that could not change anything, because the girl in the tie was already on their heels. She was able to repeat her previous good result, while the boy was able to complete the fewest tasks of the day, and now the gap between them was only a couple of points. Now Seo Joon was burning with anger, and she was going to tear everyone apart, even if she had to use the old man's name. Her partners watched her and liked her Pokemon, and they unanimously said they would choose her. The next day, they received a letter in response to their complaint, and now the inspectors could, at their discretion, award points for completing the dungeon to the person who booked it, regardless of who cleared it. The teammates were a little excited, but they couldn't get yesterday back, and there were only a few days left in the competition. In a good mood, Kim got into the car and thought that everything was over, but the next moment a man was blocking the road for them, changing a tire on his car. A similar situation repeated itself all day long for various reasons, and at the end of the day, Kim was no longer the favorite of the raid, even though all the travelers claimed not to know who Lee So-young was. The partners gathered at the academy, and Dark Hair reported that the head of the department himself had promised to take care of the matter, but Josie correctly noted that it would be too late. The girl continued that the father of their rival was the director of the Vostok Academy, where she had studied. He was a former A-level hunter, and one of the few people her old man recognized. Josie couldn't believe that he was so strong that he had the praise of the Star Sword himself. But Seo Joon argued that he was just good at talking with his tongue, so he just had a lot of connections. Given this information, she thought the investigation would go nowhere, and it would be too late. But if her grandfather had intervened, the case would have been investigated properly, which the boy did not believe. The girl also thought that he would not help them, but now she could not even contact him. The general morale dropped, and Josie could not believe that they would have to give up the victory so easily. The dark-haired woman apologized to her student, although he did not understand why. She said that she could not help him, but her partners denied her words. Kim said that without her, they would not have achieved any of this, because she was always standing up for them and supporting them with words. His partner also added that she did everything she could, and the rest was up to them. The next moment, Josie pointed to the boy, clarifying that he was responsible for the rest of the task and demanding that he tell them his plan, because he definitely had something. The boy, who had been gloomy before, smiled because his friend was right. The director of the Vostok Academy was informed that they had been beaten again, and he was pounding the table with his fist in rage, and did not understand what could have gone wrong this time. A subordinate reported that the boy had only booked the dungeon when he was right next to it, so it was impossible to predict his route now. Seo Man shouted that they had to stop him, by all means necessary. Kim was just running out of the portal. He and his partner were no longer dealing with monster carcasses, and had switched to a car after the fake accident the day before. The boy was shouting to start the car, and Josie was surprised that he managed to get through the dungeon in only 5 minutes. The director demanded that the inspectors be bribed, because they would do anything for money. But the subordinate replied that some academy had filed a complaint, and now people from the dungeon management department were assigned to the portals. It was Yun's doing. She liked the taste of power and might. The director could no longer control himself. He stood up and shouted and wanted to know why such people were responding to some poor complaint from some academy. He wanted to know its name, and the name of the participant behind it. The subordinate said that the rumor was that the academy was founded by the granddaughter of the Star Sword himself, and when he heard this, he realized that he could not counter the legend. They had to find another way to win at all costs, otherwise their academy would face serious consequences. The girl in the tie and Kim were slaying monsters left and right. They were constantly overtaking each other, and at the end of the day their score was frozen at the same mark. In the evening, the directors of the two favorite academies gathered in the office of the organizers of the event, and a commission was to be held. The girl shouted that a participant with so many cheats could not win, and the man demanded to watch his words, and would not admit anything. He said not to go too far, because it looked like he would be accused of even the accident. Seo Joon stood up and demanded to know how accidents happen only to them, and he demanded proof. The man with glasses who was supposed to deal with this issue had to stand up and calm both sides down. He said that the commission had agreed that there could be no draw, and that due to the lack of evidence, the participant could not be disqualified. Her father was happy about the news and laughed at the situation. The commission put forward its proposal. The next day, the manager of the dungeon management team welcomed the two contestants. Kim and Ian stood in front of him, and the man began to explain the rules of the final round, which would determine the winner. They stood near 3 portals. The participants could choose a dungeon and after completing it, proceed to the final level, which would determine the winner. Kim asked what was the point of going through the 3rd dungeon if the winner would be determined immediately at the moment of exiting the first portal. The man explained that although the committee had asked this question, they had not been able to find another suitable location with only 2 portals, and the spirit of competition required that all dungeons be cleared. This was the first time they had ever encountered a tie, and they decided that the winner should have more points at the end of the raid. There was no difference in the levels of the dungeons, so the participants were allowed to agree on the choice of the portal. The boy doubted that his opponent could set something up this time, but he asked her to choose the first passage, to which she agreed. He decided to go to the right, to the blue portal, and the girl to the left, to the red one. The winner had to go through the purple one in the middle, and the participants moved on to their goals. Before entering the portal, the girl told the boy not to cry later, and before he could think about it, they were given the go-ahead and jumped inside. Whatever she meant, Kim thought the main thing was to focus on winning and ran through his dungeon. But something was wrong. He was expecting to meet normal kobolds here, but he didn't feel a single breath. About 5 minutes had passed, and he still hadn't met a single monster. But the next moment, he heard a piercing scream that could not possibly belong to giant rats. In the darkness, he heard rather heavy footsteps, and the next moment a winged beast was roaring at the boy. A manticore was approaching him, its eyes glowing yellow and horns sticking out of its head. Before the boy could think how a level 4 monster could be here, the beast jumped on him. Perhaps it was a mistake in scanning the dungeon level, but it was too late to retreat. Kim flew toward the monster, his shining spear passing through the beast's body. This time he easily dealt with an opponent of this level, but he wasted too much time looking for it, and immediately rushed back to the portal. He thought that his opponent could have already completed the first dungeon, and was about to finish the second. The guy flew out of the portal, and the observer recorded the arrival of the participant. Kim shouted that there was a manticore on his level. The man asked again, and the boy pointed to his portal and said that he could check it himself. While the man was clarifying how an academy student could handle a monster of that level, Kim demanded revenge because it was unfair. The man fully understood his request, but at the moment he could do nothing. The boy continued to mumble that there was a whole manticora there, and asked why he couldn't do anything now. But the man replied that the other participants still hadn't returned, and that was strange. Kim thought that she had nothing to do there for 10 minutes with the kobolds. But at that moment, giant green eyes shone behind the girl. Seo Joon was telling her brother to be patient, treating his wounds on his face. He cried out in pain, and said that her hands were not very gentle, and that when she became a high-ranking huntress, she would probably become a monster herself. She ordered him to shut up, and asked why he didn't listen to his father. The brother replied that he could not deceive others for personal gain, and was ready to go even against his father's will. The girl looked at him with disapproval, and the boy again told the story of the need for steadfastness of heart and no compromise. She didn't let him finish and stood up and shouted that he was at it again, and it was no longer funny. Everyone was already calling him a brainless fool. The girl demanded that he not jump over his head, because he could not take care of himself, and throwing kindness around would not lead him to good. She ridiculed his stories about compromises and ordered him to wake up, because the era of professional hunters had come, and the era of heroes had either passed or they were all dead. The boy, with an imperturbably happy face, said that there were still some. To his sister's surprise, he replied that there were as many of them as there were honest, incorruptible politicians. The girl could not stand it any longer, because it turned out that her attempts were in vain, and that one could expect more results from talking to a stone. The brother kept laughing and added that if there were no more heroes left, he would become a politician. The boy said that the day would come when they would meet, and he would be a hero. A girl was running in the rain, and there was a crowd ahead of her that she had to push through. The next moment she froze, and tears flowed from her eyes. The medics had already covered the boy's face, and there was a lot of blood around his head. Ian stood there, and thought he was the biggest fool in the world. The father said that although he knew his son was stupid, he was not stupid enough to stand up for a stranger. The man asked if she would not disappoint him and be so stupid, because he died trying to help others despite his capabilities. The girl promised not to disappoint him, and said that she was not like her brother. She had mentally abandoned his views on life forever. Kim was now asking if the girl was still in the first dungeon, and the inspector assured him that she was. The man said that the boy had won even under such circumstances, but they couldn't deny the participant a rematch if he still wanted one. Now he only needed to complete the last dungeon to become the winner of the raid. Kim didn't answer anything. He was frozen in thought, because he was sure that the mistake in calculating the level of the dungeon and the meeting with that manticore was the work of his rival. The next moment, the assistant inspector shouted in surprise. His mana meter showed strange numbers. It showed an increase in the always stable level of magic. At that moment, Kim remembered the conversation with the old man about the dungeon's distortions and how their levels could suddenly rise, so the measurements did not match the original ones. These distortions had many side effects and, in addition to the usual increase in difficulty, could cause a breakthrough into their world earlier than expected. The inspector asked his subordinate about the equipment's serviceability, even though it was quite reliable and had never failed them before. This was the first time he had seen such a thing in his 20 years of experience, and it had never happened in their time. The chief decided to call professional hunters to investigate the situation just in case. The inspector told the raid participant that they had made a mistake and that their confrontation would be postponed until later, but when he turned his head to the boy, he was gone. Meanwhile, Yin was coughing up blood, lying against the wall without her left arm and in great pain. Her sword was broken, and the next moment a shadow covered her. In front of her was a giant goat-headed monster, green mana evaporating from its eyes, and approaching the victim who had hidden from it. It was a level 6 monster, a Nerkura. He began to scream loudly, and the girl thought that justice really did not exist in this world. Nerkura rushed forward, his powerful steps leaving traces in the stone floor. Yin said goodbye to her life with her eyes closed and told herself that at least she would not die in such a stupid way as her brother. But the next moment the beast roared again and nothing happened. The girl opened her eyes in surprise and saw someone in front of her. A boy with a spear stood in front of her and held back the enemy. Kim could hardly contain his impulse and asked through the force if she could move. But the girl told him to get out of here and leave her alone. Kim did not listen to her. He continued to confront the beast and emphasized that they had little time. She asked him what he was doing here, and the boy managed to knock the giant's claws aside. Kim didn't answer, just said that as he expected, a level 6 monster just needs to be attacked endlessly, and he rushed into the fight. He jumped and gave the goat's head a spearhead on the skull and ran away. His plan worked, and now the enemy was focused on him. He sent his powerful blows one after another at the attacker. The swings of his red claws left a trail in the air, and the boy realized that he would not survive even one such hit. But these movements were so familiar and predictable to Kim that he was just going to continue to wound the beast. But the next moment something unexpected happened. Nerkura attacked the boy with his horns and pierced his shoulder. After that, he threw the attacker into the air, and blood poured out of his wound. The monster roared, and the boy landed near the girl with a deep wound. He struggled to get up, leaning on his spear, and said that he had underestimated the enemy's agility, so the fight would take longer than he thought. Kim asked if the girl was still unable to move, and she wondered why he was doing this, and why he had come to rescue her in the first place. She shouted that it was none of his business, and he had no use for it. He just needed to clear the rest of the dungeon and take the victory. The girl asked him not to misunderstand her, but she could see that he was only taking part in the raid for the money. Kim said that she was right, and he really came for the money. Ying continued to yell at him to get out of here, just go out and win. She had done a lot of things, but she shouldn't expect thanks for saving her. The boy told her to be quiet, even though the girl's actions were definitely not right, and he was not going to forgive her, but he did not think it was a reason why she should die. The girl listened to him in silence, and her brother appeared before her eyes again. Their silhouettes merged together, and she could hear his voice again, promising to meet her someday in the hero's account. Kim said that her actions were not even a reason for him not to help her. She could hear her brother's voice again, saying that he was the kind of person who didn't care about profit. He acted without thinking about it, because he did it all to be her hero. Kim was now shouting that there was no greater reward in the world than the opportunity to save another person. The beast was not going to wait for them to speak, and the boy tried to drive it away from them. After another swing of the spear, he pointed it at the enemy and grabbed the shaft tightly, covering the girl. Kim remembered the centaur's lecture. He said that intuition was part of the mind, but most students did not understand the meaning of these words. The part about the mind was about assessing the situation, and even though he had said earlier that it was a waste of his resources, and that there would be no time left for action, most of them misunderstood this information. The students decided to completely abandon the assessment of the situation and reflection, and he told them about this mistake at the very beginning. Since intuition is a part of the mind, it was necessary to combine them together with feelings. The feeling of assessing the situation was the reunion of mind and feelings. It was the instinctive form of the transcendental intuition. The beast was attacking, the boy's eyes were glowing with blue mana, and he began to see what he needed to do to dodge the attack. The mighty paw of the goat head flew past, barely touching Kim's face, causing some blood to flow. The boy now saw perfectly where the enemy was aiming and felt every movement of his muscles. The next moment, he noticed a slight contraction of the monster's neck muscle, and was able to dodge the sudden attack with his horns, jumping away from its head. Kim no longer hoped for victory, he only wanted to hold out longer until the reinforcements that the inspector had already called for arrived. But he was not worried about himself, he was worried about the bleeding girl, who was now lying on the floor unconscious. So he couldn't afford to just defend himself, so he attacked. Kim was enveloped in a glowing aura. He remembered the power that could tear mountains out of the ground, and the spirit that could turn the whole world upside down. The boy flew screaming at the monster, with the spear in front of him. As the beast roared towards him and opened its mouth, Kim realized that he was sensing the situation on the level of instincts, and knew that he would not win. He was going to increase the radius of his attack by concentrating his magic on the tip of the spear. A blinding flash illuminated the stream of blood, and the girl woke up and could not believe her eyes. Kim was sighing heavily, and in front of him, a giant was falling to the ground with a loud sound, his body pierced by the magical streams of his spear. Ian said that it couldn't be and asked how he did it, but the boy didn't answer, he just came to himself, leaning on the spear. Now he has managed to make significant progress in the lectures, which were getting harder and harder to pass. Kim was carrying the girl, leaning on the spear himself. He thought he was going to die of embarrassment helping her, because she was too close. But at the same time, he begged her not to die and to say at least a word, because it seemed to him that it was all in vain. Yin barely managed to say that she was still alive, and he was happy to hear that they needed to get out of here as soon as possible because she didn't have time. The inspector shouted where he had gone, and when he saw the girl, he asked what had happened. Kim promised to tell everything and asked to call an ambulance for the girl. He put the girl down on the grass and stayed by her side. Yin whispered that she didn't think he was her savior and still thought he had made a mistake. He said she could think what she wanted and that it was not for her sake. The inspector shouted that they both needed to go to the hospital and that this should not have happened at all. Medical workers loaded the girl onto a stretcher, and another helped Kim walk. The news of the discovery of the high-level monster by the Academy's students spread quickly, and was on the top of news sites. It was definitely not an error of the instruments in the initial measurement of the dungeon, because the difference in the strength of the monsters was too great, and this had never happened before. This event attracted the attention of not only the public but also the government. Now everyone knew Kim's name, even though it was the first time they had heard of him, and wondered how a student could defeat Mercure himself, and now his academy was on the radar. The man in the hoodie told Kalia that the apostle of abstinence himself wanted to see her. The girl thought it might be because of the recent discovery of the dungeon's warp. Meanwhile, the little girl was excitedly asking the old man about the student who had defeated the monster on his own. She showed him the article about Kim on his phone and asked if he was really from Seo Joon Academy. He didn't even want to look at it, but said that if she meant that ugly gnome, it was really him, which surprised the kid. Kim put his head in his hands and muttered about his money. He was in the hospital room with his partner. Ajasi was peeling an apple for him and asked if that was the only thing that worried him. The guy jumped up and down, explaining that he deserved it, but the committee decided to award a draw and divide the money between the winners. They could have played some kind of game to divide the money, rock, paper, scissors would have worked, or some other hand game. Ajosa thought that the girl had lost her hand, and the boy said that he was counting on it, because he could easily win. His partner said that he had already begun to lose his humanity in the pursuit of money, but he did not listen and suggested a game of counting. Just then, Seo Young entered the room, and Ajosi asked why he had saved that girl, and the boy clutched his head and shouted that he had no idea. The dark-haired woman asked what was wrong with him, and his partner explained that he was whining about the tie and the distribution of money. Yoon didn't understand what they were talking about, because another participant refused the prize, and at the same time revealed all the fraud her father had committed. She was also in the hospital, and one of the doctors told her that he would even be put on trial, although when he was surrounded by journalists, he denied everything. Kim remembered her saying that he had made a mistake when he came to get her, and now he couldn't believe that she had done it. Seo Young had actually come for a reason. She had to tell the boy what she had said. When they met in the corridor, the girl with the bandaged forearm said that in addition to his wrong actions, she had made a mistake too. The dark-haired girl did not understand what she was trying to tell him, but passed on her message word for word. Anyway, Kim will receive all her money and additional benefits, because the government took full responsibility for this case. Yoon said that the most important bonus was not having to pay tax on his prize money, and an additional 70,000. The boy's mood immediately lifted, but the dark-haired woman explained that this amount was only on paper, and was intended to compensate for the damage. Kim did not listen to the last information, but was already calculating how much his prize money and bonuses would total, and what they would look like. But Yoon was about to announce another important news. She was proud to say that their academy had finally been upgraded to the 3rd class thanks to the raid. They had managed to accumulate the necessary points, and now they would have certain privileges, including free access to level 4 dungeons. Kim was excited because the last time he was worried that he hadn't advanced the academy and lost money. He said that this time he was lucky, and Dark Hair thanked her student for everything, because it was his merit. The boy joked that she would finally be able to recruit normal students, and Ajosi noticed his change of mood and said that things seemed to be looking up. Kim agreed. He didn't even have to play rock, paper, scissors, and he even offered to have lunch. His partner said that as soon as he had money, he started to look like a human being and reminded him of his promise to treat everyone. Ajashi told him to order something expensive, and Yoon asked for sushi. The boy was delighted with how it ended and grabbed his phone, because it was a good time to shop. He couldn't wait any longer and quickly moved on to the Tranquility Store. But the next moment, he put the phone down with regret because the price of his spear had gone up by all his money. He had already imagined his treasure and remembered for sure that it cost about 70,000. But he still didn't understand the principle behind the price recalculation every time. He wanted to wait for the moment with the most favorable price, but now he was afraid that it would only grow. If the price did go up, he would simply be left without a penny in his pocket, and even lose more than he could have saved. Kim decided to give up on the spear and buy something else. He looked through the list of goods and looked for something not too expensive. After the weapon replicas came other famous artifacts, such as Aphrodite's belt, which allowed you to seduce anyone of the opposite sex, or the glaive, which was used to defeat the mighty wolf Fenrir. Among other weapons, that spear seemed to be the best choice among all of them, but there were doubts whether the artifact was really like the one on the photo and worth the money. The boy suddenly remembered all the times he was close to buying it, and when he thought about taking out a loan, and when the price just kept getting recalculated to the amount of all his savings, and even when Seo Joon offered to pay for the weapon. He couldn't get out of his mind why such artifacts were so cheap, because even as replicas they should have a price tens or even hundreds of times higher. He tried to foresee what the trap might be, and it occurred to him that someone might have made an accidental purchase without paying attention to the price recalculation. For a Transcendental Academy, such a scam sounded strange, but the boy thought that caution was never a bad thing. In addition, for some reason the store did not have detailed descriptions of the goods, and he could only guess which one was worth what. Kim had completely dropped the phone and thought it was just a pig in a poke, and it was impossible to find out the current availability of the goods before making a purchase. It would be good to find some reviews, and the guy remembered a forum he hadn't visited because he still didn't have an ID and couldn't write anything. Kim should have thought of this earlier, because he could have read the questions and answers without it. The mentor would have to clarify a lot of things, and he would definitely need to ask him about everything as soon as he showed up. Opening the feedback tab, Kim saw a number of topics, one of which was a review of the products he had purchased. The stranger, who was 2,700 years old and whose name was hidden, promised to share his experience in his article, so that others would not make the same mistake. He was going to publish 100 reviews of the products he had used and wanted to rank them on a 10-point scale. It seemed to him a great achievement to own 100 items from this store, but the number of emoticons in the article was a bit alarming. The first item in the description was the Aegis shield, even though it could block any blow, but then there was some stupid thing in the form of a jellyfish head that seemed to turn anyone who looked at it to stone. Although it was an incredible ability, and all enemies did turn to stone, this thing had no buttons, and the user could become a stone with one careless glance. The author gave this garbage a 2 out of 10, although as a gift to a close friend, this stupid thing was worth the highest rating. At first, Kim thought he was joking when he wrote about 100 things at the beginning, but judging by the length of the list and how long it took to read it, it was true. At number 87 was an artifact called the Cabesis. Although the description said that it could carry a lot of lightweight but large items, it was not that simple. Few people knew that its fabric was imbued with the magic of space, so that the bag could expand its internal size to a gigantic scale by its standards, but it also contained the magic of stopping time and the magic of lightning. The author advised that such a thing was worth buying only as a replica, and was actually quite strong because of the adamantium threads. But the replica had its drawbacks, as the magician's parameters were somewhat worse. Its internal space was no longer infinite, and its ability to reduce the weight of items worked only by 70%. But it was a 100 out of 10 product that would definitely come in handy, and the stranger recommended it to everyone. Kim remembered where he had heard the name, and thought of a Greek goddess who had such an artifact. She gave it to Perseus, who used it to defeat Medusa. The boy became interested in this object and decided to find out its price. But after recalculation it turned out to be quite expensive. It cost 70,000, just like the spear from the beginning. Although the price was quite high, Kim could already imagine packing monster carcasses inside and hiding his long spear there. He was hesitant to buy it because it did not reduce his weight completely, but now he realized that its properties would be useful to him. By putting all of his belongings and additional weight in it, he would be able to do his daily exercises with greater efficiency. It was already night, and the boy was determined to buy it later. 3 days later, he was waving his new spear in the middle of the street and admiring the artifact, because it looked just as good in person as it did in the catalog. The boy was dressed in new stylish clothes, and he was wearing the same Kabesis bag on his belt. He had to first test the combat properties of his new weapon, as well as the properties of the bag. But both things had an unusual aura about them, and they definitely had to work. But having enjoyed the new things enough, the guy was already whining about their cost. The store was really cheating, because when he bought the artifacts, his account was debited completely, even though there should have been something left over. He was not going to regret the money, as he had finally bought the things he wanted, and with their help, he could easily pay back every penny. Seo Joon appeared behind the boy, and at first she did not recognize the disguised boy from the back. She asked him if he was going back to the dungeon, because it had been too little time since he was injured. He replied that everything was fine, and he was ready, and that he had to earn more money. The dark-haired girl wondered what he needed more for, since he had just received a decent amount of money, but he said he had already spent it all. She wanted to ask him when he had time, but looking at his clothes and admiring his new spear, she understood immediately. From the shining of the spear and the boy's satisfied face, it was clear without further ado where he had spent so much money. She didn't understand how he could spend it so easily despite his constant complaints about the lack of money, and she was even mentally angry with him for a moment, but decided not to say anything to him, since it was his own money. They went down to the 4th level of the dungeon, and Yoon asked him to stay close to her so that she could protect them both in case of an unexpected attack. Ahead of them were some statues, and under them was a box wrapped in chains, like a treasure chest. The gargoyle statues began to crack, their top layer crumbled, and the figures began to move. The boy had his spear ready, and thought it was a great opportunity to try it out, and even though the monsters had to have good armor at this level, such a weapon would definitely do some damage. The boy rushed forward. The stone monsters were very good for testing Longina's spear. He was going to use it without magic to start with, because it could pierce anything on its own. The gargoyle's eyes glowed red, it snarled, bared its fangs, and flew down toward the intruder. The revived statue did not have time to understand anything, because it saw only a blurred silhouette of a spear after a swift blow. With a light wave and a whistle, the boy cut the monster in half like butter. He surprised his mentor, and was no less dumbfounded himself, freezing in the pose of completing the blow. The girl asked what it was, because the stone monster shattered into pieces behind the first one. Kim asked her the same thing, but the dark-haired girl had no idea, and it was him who did it, so she didn't have to ask her. After everything she'd been through, Yoon thought that nothing would surprise her around him. But he rushed forward again and sliced the monsters like tofu. It was as if monsters were made of soybeans in those days. Although there were not many corpses, Kim decided to test the properties of his other artifact. She didn't understand what he was doing with such a small bag that could barely fit one monster's hand. But before she could finish her thought, the boy carelessly pushed piece after piece of the whole monster into the bag, then returned the bag to his belt and started jumping. It turned out that it was quite difficult, although the weight of the monster was reduced by 70%, but the next moment he was already shaking it back out and was going to use the artifact at the end of the trip. Yoon couldn't believe her eyes and decided to check how much he had spent on these things just in case, because it looked like it was not 300,000 but 300 million. The guy said cautiously that it was nothing like that, and the girl didn't understand how he could buy such expensive things for his pennies and where exactly. Kim couldn't think of anything better and said that he had bought these things in one of the random shops for hunters that he had met on his way. Judging by the happy expression on his mentor's face, this was not his best idea, because the next moment she was asking him where exactly that store was. Now he had to make up an excuse that it was in a dark alley near his house, and was for academy students. At this, Yun's face lit up even more, because she wanted such cool things for only 300,000 and a penny. She demanded to know the address as soon as possible, because she wanted to go there right now. Her enthusiasm began to subside as Kim began to tell her that the seller was going to close his shop forever and go on a trip around the world. She looked at his face and realized that he was probably lying. She was upset by what she heard but decided to believe him. Kim mentally begged her for forgiveness, but he could not tell her the whole truth, and she would not have believed him anyway and would not have been able to check it all. They continued to walk through the dungeon, which was barely lit by single torches, when the next moment they heard a massive crash of stones. Around the room they entered, a dozen red eyes began to glow in the darkness. Deciding that it was too dangerous, the girl said she would take care of the many enemies herself and began to draw her katana. Kim stopped her and asked her to leave it to him, because he wanted to try something. He had thought that the new spear could cut through stones like soybeans without magic, so now he wanted to test its true power using mana. The boy remembered the spirit and power that moved mountains and ruled the world. Rushing forward at a group of monsters with a shining spear, he destroyed all the enemies in one fell swoop, leaving not even a trace of dust. A powerful whirlwind of air spread through the hall and blew away the girl's hair. She did not understand where such a powerful force came from in this blow. But the next moment, the boy blew the rest of the enemies away with a ranged attack, releasing a magical stream from the tip of his spear that cut them to pieces. Yun could no longer hold back her words and recalled the names of all the gods. A long sinkhole appeared in the stone floor in front of him.